I'm calling the meeting to order, and to establish a quorum, I will take the roll call. Mark Truscott, absent. John Roshinsky here. Susan Landry.
Here.
Patricia Trouth.
Here.
And Andrew Bowden.
Present.
Okay, 4 of us are present to establish a quorum. We'll move on to the chair's procedural remarks and LATC member introductory comments. I am John Roshinsky, now the acting chair of the LATC, and we'll ask our executive director, Trish Rodriguez, to provide a brief update on the reason for that. Trish, are you on?
Sorry, I was not unmuted.
Okay.
Thank you, John. You are actually the chair. The former chair, Mark Truscott's term ended on June 1st. He has since been serving in his grace period, and his service ended recently, and the governor-appointed position is vacant. Until such time that a new member is appointed, the vice chair, you, shall assume the office of the chair until the next meeting, when an election shall be held per the LATC administrative manual. So since the LATC also has held its annual election for chair and vice chair in December, both positions will be voted upon in December. I wanted to thank Mark. He has served on the LATC since September of 2015 as both chair and vice chair. Since then, LATC completed many important strategic objectives, including the completion of the 2019 Sunset Review. I would like to thank him for his service and his valuable time. We wish him well and look forward to hearing from the governor's office on a new appointee.
All right, thank you. This meeting is being provided as a webcast for the public. Pursuant to the provisions of Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N 2920, dated March 17th, 2020, a physical meeting location is not being provided. Committee members, please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. Members and staff can keep their camera on during the meeting. When you wish to speak, please use the raise hand feature or physically raise your hand on the video. When speaking, please identify yourself each time. I'd also like to thank and welcome Tian Fang, the current California Architects Board President, who is attending today. In regards to any voting requirements, all motions and seconds will be repeated for the record, and votes on all motions will be taken by roll call. We will be taking a short break sometime shortly after noon, and we'll decide the length at that time, short lunch break. And if necessary, we may be providing a short breaks during the meeting itself. At this point in time, I'd like to move on to item C, which is our public comment on items not on the agenda, and ask that if there's anyone in the public that wishes to speak at this time about any particular issues that they would like to bring to the attention to the LATC board, committee, I should say, please make yourself identified at this point in time.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the committee, I have now opened up the question and answer panel. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the icon with a question mark within a square located at the bottom center of your screen. We are sharing instructions for your reference. In the ask field, please type that you would like to make a public comment and send it to all panelists. It's not necessary to identify yourself in order to make a public comment. And please note that the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once unmuted, the member of the public may verbally state their comment. This is we don't want you to type your question, just indicate that you'd like to make a comment. And please note that if any attendees use a profane name, they will not be called upon to prevent members of the public from being subjected to profane language. While you're free to express criticism or negative views for the sake of members of the public participating on the call, please do not use profane language when making public comments. And this is a moderator. At this time, no one has indicated that they'd like to make a public comment. Chair Roshinsky, would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please do so.
All right, I'll do that. Thank you.
All right, we will move on to item D, update on the Department of Consumer Affairs. And with us today is Carrie Holmes, Deputy Director, Board and Bureau Relations with the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Good morning, Chair Rachinsky and committee members. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. I'm Carrie Holmes, Deputy Director, Board and Bureau Relations at the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you for having me here to your meeting. I was appointed by Governor Newsom to serve as Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Relations beginning June 1st. I most recently came from the Senate, where I was Legislative Director for Senator Jim Bell. Before my time in the legislature, I served at the Secretary of State's office as Assistant Deputy. I've always been passionate about consumer protection, and so I'm very happy to be here at DCA working with you. I'm part of a new leadership team, as you know. In January, Governor Newsom appointed Lourdes Castro Ramirez as the Secretary of the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, effective March 2nd. Governor Newsom appointed Jennifer Simoes as DCA's Deputy Director of Legislation and Megan Allred as Assistant Deputy Director of Legislation. Finally, on April 16th, Christine Lally was appointed by Governor Newsom as Chief Deputy Director of DCA, and she joined us in July. Now the director has her team in place, she can devote more time to her top priorities. I'm happy to report that in July, the DCA Budget Office and Office of Information Services launched 4 new budget expenditure and revenue reports utilizing fiscal information. The reports are fast, detailed, and easy to generate. The 4 new reports can be produced using DCA's Quality Business Interactive Reporting Tool, or QBIRT. These reports with clean data will aid committee staff in providing budget reports in your meeting materials. DCA is very pleased to be providing these reports and is working on 3 more budget reports in the future. Another DCA priority is regulations, improving timelines and transparency. DCA's regulations unit was created by DCA Legal to directly assist boards and bureaus with regulations packages. The department also developed an online system to manage and track regulations packages and streamline their review, called Sharewell. Sharewell testing with a pilot cohort is now complete. There will be regular check-ins with the pilot groups to solicit feedback, and the feedback will be evaluated to determine the next stages of the rollout. I would also like to update you on business modernization, as your committee is part of Cohort 2. Business Modernization Cohort 2 was in the middle of project planning when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The project is currently replanning to ensure it can be supported from a staffing and fiscal perspective in the current environment. Planning meetings will be conducted soon with these programs. Thank you so much for your patience. Our work continues even though COVID-19 has changed the way we do business now and in the future. DCA temporarily closed all offices to the public in March in response to state and local stay-at-home orders to help reduce the spread of COVID-19. DCA and its programs have implemented telework plans and require physical distancing for those employees who cannot telework. Offices reopened to the public on June 15th with preventative measures to safeguard the health and safety of employees and visitors. We are truly grateful to you for your continued service and to your staff who are being so flexible. One of the few upsides to staying at home is the opportunity to expand online and remote learning. I want to invite you to participate in DCA's board member orientation, which is now being offered as 2 half-day sessions on WebEx, October 21st and 28th. The training is tailored towards board members, but much of the content will have value to your role in the committee. I encourage you to register on DCA's board member resources page. I look forward to getting to know you better and meeting you in person one day. In the meantime, if you have any questions or need anything from DCA, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am still pretty new, so I may not have the answer today, but I will find it for you. Thank you again for inviting me to your meeting. That concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you, Carrie. At this point in time, I'd like to open up to the board if anyone has any questions for Carrie. Okay, hearing none.
No, John,
Up.
I'm raising my hand.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
You gotta
I
watch
didn't.
the raise hand feature.
Okay.
Welcome aboard, Carrie, and Jim Bell is my senator, and I've known him since 1985.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
So welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Susan. Any other comments? Okay. All right. Should we move to item E, review and possible action on the February 5th, 2020 LATC meeting minutes? Andy?
Yes, I move to accept the minutes as presented.
All right. Is there a second? Susan? All right. Any discussion, any particular comments on the minutes? Yes, Susan?
Sorry, I'm trying to figure mute and unmute. I was not at that meeting, so I will not, am I allowed to vote or do I just abstain?
That's up to you. Have you had an opportunity to read through the minutes? Okay.
So I
Well,
can vote on it.
yes.
All right.
This is Tara. I would advise Ms. Landry to abstain from voting on the meeting minutes since she was not present at the meeting.
Right. Okay.
Sounds good.
So,
I move to a second approving the minutes.
Okay. I believe we already had a second, but that will be noted. Oh, we did not. Okay. Sorry, Susan. I thought you were seconding when you came on. Okay. Thank you, Patricia.
Okay.
Okay. Andy, you had your hand up.
No, I'm sorry. I guess I need to put my hand down again.
Okay.
Is it down there? Okay. Sorry about that.
All right. I guess at this point in time, I would ask, is there any public comments at this point in time?
This is the moderator, and thank you, Chair Roshinsky. I'll go ahead and open the Q&A panel. All right, the Q&A panel is now available. If you would like to make a public comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" in the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and send it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference, and we'll give you a moment to access this feature. This is the moderator, and I'm seeing no requests for public comment at this time. Chair Roshinsky, would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, I'll do that. Thank you.
All right. Hearing no request for comment, I will put the motion to approve the minutes as submitted to a vote. I will do the roll call. John Roshinsky, yes. Oh, sorry. Okay. Susan Landry?
Susan, you're muted.
Jane,
Okay.
you got that now? Okay.
Yep. Patricia Trouth?
Yes, I approve.
And Andrew Bowden?
Aye.
All right, the motion passes, 3 affirmed and 1 abstention. Okay, and we will then move on to item F, the program manager's report, and I will ask Trish Rodriguez to present this item.
Thank you, John. So I first wanted to announce a couple of personnel items. Since our last meeting, we recruited to fill behind Courtney, who was promoted to the Special Projects Analyst position, and to fill the Examinations Staff Services Analyst position. Blake Clark was promoted from the Licensing Administration Office Technician position, effective April 1st. We also recruited to fill behind that vacancy, and Harmony Navarro joins us from private industry and was hired on August 17th. In addition, Enforcement Analyst Stacy Townsend was promoted in place from the Staff Services Analyst classification to Associate Governmental Program Analyst. Congratulations to staff and their promotions and new assignments. At the last meeting, committee requested, if a simplified, I'm going to move on to the regulations. They requested a simplified illustration of the status of the regulations, if that could be provided. A chart was created and included in the meeting materials, and we have sent that out to the members. The chart is intended to supplement the details provided in the program manager's report. I hope you find it helpful and welcome any input after the update of the rulemaking packages. Before I start on the update of the various regulation packages, I thought this would be a good time to introduce Karen Halbo, our new legislative attorney. We've been meeting with her weekly to discuss the progress of our regulations, and she may assist during this portion of the meeting. So she's been very helpful, and just wanted to welcome her. So thank you, Karen, for all your help. I'll start with California Code of Regulations 2611, abandonment of application, 2611.5, retention of candidate files, and 2616, application for licensure following examination. The LATC's retention schedule expired in December of 2018. In the process of updating and implementing a new retention schedule, it was determined that sections of the Act needed updating. So staff collaborated with DCA Legal Counsel to draft appropriate language in order to define the abandonment of the application within Section 2611, provide additional authority for the retention and purging of candidate files, creating 2611.5, and adding additional language in 2616, providing for the abandonment of a candidate's application for licensure. The committee approved the language at its February 5th, 2020 meeting, and the board approved the language at its February 28th meeting. Staff submitted the regulatory proposal to DCA Legal Affairs for pre-review on April 10th. The next package is 2615 and 2620. 2615 is form of examination, and 2620 education and training credits. This package was originally published for public notice by the Office of Administrative Law in 2016. However, receiving substantial public comment, additional research was necessary, and the rulemaking file was withdrawn in 2017. Due to insufficient time to finalize the proposal within the one-year deadline imposed by Government Code Section 11346.4. The Education Experience Subcommittee was appointed to further discuss expanding initial pathways to licensure. Proposed regulatory language was approved by the board in September 2018 and submitted to DCA Legal Affairs for pre-review in February of 2019. DCA Legal concluded its preview in June 2019 and began the initial analysis. During this period, the Department of Finance made changes as to what information is required, and DCA is working on updating and providing the requested information. Once this is complete and signed off by the director and agency, the next steps will be submitted to the Office of Administrative Law, published for public notice, and a 45-day public comment period. This rulemaking file is prioritized at the top of the other rulemaking files currently in process for legal. The next one is 2620.5, requirements for an approved extension certificate program. This rulemaking package is currently with DCA Legal for pre-review. The current UCLA extension certificate program's approval expires on December 31st of this year. A self-evaluation report was received from the program and is being reviewed under existing language in 2620.5 and will be presented to the committee in December for approval. Section 2655, substantial relationship criteria, and 2656, criteria for rehabilitation. The proposed rulemaking would implement Assembly Bill 2138, which aims to reduce barriers to licensure for individuals with a criminal history. This regulation package is at Office of Administrative Law as of June 24th. The proposal included a request for expedited review and will become effective when filed with the Secretary of State. Section 2680, disciplinary guidelines. In order to comply with AB 2138, changes to the disciplinary guidelines were necessary to reflect proposed changes for sections 2655 and 2656. Section 2680 incorporates the disciplinary guidelines by reference and required changes to reflect the revised disciplinary guidelines. In July 2019, the proposed regulations were submitted to DCA Legal for pre-review and in October for initial analysis. This package is currently with DCA. Section 2671, public presentments and advertising requirements. LATC set an objective of researching the feasibility of requiring a license number on all correspondence and advertising platforms to inform and protect consumers. Currently, Section 2671 requires that a landscape architect only include their name and words landscape architect in all forms of advertising or public presentments. In an effort to better inform and protect California consumers, the proposed changes of the current advertising requirements will expand and include license numbers in all forms of advertising. The board approved the committee's recommendations at its June 12, 2019 meeting. Staff submitted regulatory proposal to DCA Legal Affairs for pre-review in August of 2019 and for initial analysis by DCA Legal and Budget Office in February of this year. This package is currently with DCA. Before we move on to the enforcement annual update, do we have any questions on the chart or any of the reg packages? We don't normally cover the exam results, but I just wanted to remind the members that sometime after the our linkage study report is complete, OPIS has offered to come to the LATC and discuss the pass rate questions that members have had. So Stacy, do you want to go ahead and provide the enforcement annual update?
Yes, I will. So at the end of fiscal year 1920, the LATC had 9 pending enforcement cases. The average time to complete an internal investigation was 70 days, which is quite a bit less than the 270 days that is our goal. And then the attached report includes tables and graphs comparing the types of, or for the types of complaints received by LATC during fiscal year 1920. It compares the complaints received, closed, and pending by fiscal year. I know there's some confusion with the pending cases. It's just to say that's how many cases were pending at the end of that fiscal year. So at the end of fiscal year 2017-18, there were 16 open cases. It's not to say that they're still open today or at the end of fiscal year 1920. It was just at the end of that fiscal year. There's the comparison of age pending of the complaints, summary of closed complaints by fiscal year, summary of disciplinary and enforcement actions by fiscal year, and the most common violations of the Landscape Architects Practice Act. That's all I have. If there's any questions?
All right, thank you, Stacy and Trish. Any questions from the board? If not, I will open it up for any public questions.
This is the moderator, and at the request of the chair, I will go ahead and open the Q&A feature. All right, the question and answer panel is now available. If you would like to make a public comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" and submit it to all panelists. The field is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you do not see it, go ahead and click on the question mark within a square at the bottom middle of your screen. We are displaying instructions for your reference. This is the moderator, and I'm seeing no requests for public comment at this time. Chair Roshinsky, would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, I'll do that. Thank you.
All right, we will move on to item G, Council of Landscape Architectural Registration Boards, or CLARB. This will be a three-part discussion. The first part, we will have Matt Miller, who is the current Chief Executive Officer, and Veronica Meadows, the Senior Director for Strategy from CLARB, give a presentation. After that, we will do a review of the CLARB September 10th, 2020 virtual annual meeting agenda, followed by a review and possible action on the 2020 CLARB Board of Directors and Leadership Advisory Council elections ballot. So with that, I would like to welcome Matt and Veronica. If you'd like to start your presentation.
John,
Sure.
this is Trish. Could I interject really quickly? I wanted to give some background on CLARB, just for
Okay.
those that might not be familiar before they get started. So CLARB is the Council of Landscape Architectural Registration Boards, and they're the national council for member boards across the U.S., Canada, and Puerto Rico. They administer the national exam known as the Landscape Architect Registration Examination, or as we refer to the LAIR. They're currently undergoing efforts to standardize the licensure process for all candidates, so we've invited them to present an overview of their initiative and answer any questions the committee may have. So with us today is Matt Miller, the Chief Executive Officer, and Veronica Meadows, Senior Director of Strategy from CLARB. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Trish and John. I just want to check to make sure you can hear me. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate the invitation. You've already gone through the agenda, so I won't want to reiterate that. But if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So my name's Matt Miller. I'm the CEO of CLARB. I've been on board, I'm still counting in months, so I've been on board for about 10 months now with CLARB. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. We were able to have some conversation leading up to this. I actually received a letter from Mark Truscott asking for some specifics as they pertain to the uniform application and candidate pre-approval, which we're going to go into a little bit more depth about in our presentation. But before we do that, I think it's important for us to take a little bit of a step back and talk about our Rethink Regulation project, because this is really where some of these items have originated. So with that, we can walk through that, and then as John mentioned, we'll talk some more about pre-approval and then our annual meeting and see what kind of questions you might have. We'll also talk a little bit about terminology. One of the things that, as I've found coming on board to a new organization, is that terminology can always be an obstacle in understanding what we're talking about. So we're going to clarify, I think, some terminology for everyone as well when we're starting to talk about different aspects, so that we're not using different words to say the same thing. So if you could go then the next slide, please. So about 3 years ago, this general question was posed, and this is something that CLARB does regularly, is try to stay ahead of things that are coming at us. And it was really the questions, why should CLARB and our member boards that Trish described for you rethink landscape architectural regulation. And really that initiative was started and inspired by the idea that the current licensure process at that time and still today could be more frictionless. And it should be frictionless in a way to promote the viability of our boards, our members, to better support our licensees, and really take a look at the landscape architect profession as it relates to public health, safety, and welfare. There were a variety of factors that played into the direction that this project took, and I'm going to speak a little bit about those if you could go to the next slide. So, for us, the question was, why rethink regulation at all? Why isn't it fine the way it is? And in many ways, it works quite well. But as you can see, there were 4 key theme areas that really drove the whole conversation. The first one, advancement in technologies, and I think we're all seeing that technology outpaces us. Every time you turn around, got a new cell phone, iPhone last year, and there's already 2 new versions of it out. Technology really kind of is going at lightning speed. Even for us in the space, everything, I think you're even experiencing yourselves, everything from new registration systems, licensure portals, I think like the one you're working on, technologies like blockchain, digital badging, and other exponential technology. It's really opening up new ways to process and validate and verify information and credentials. So that was one major element of the push behind this research. Another piece of it was regulatory reform. What we anticipated then was that regulation was going to continue to be scrutinized in the foreseeable future. And it was an opportunity for CLARB to take a leadership position in understanding where those attacks were coming from. And we've seen regulation reform in different shapes and sizes across the country. Everything from the consumer choice bills, right to earn a living acts, licensure review. There's push for more and more universal reciprocity and second chance acts as well. These are all kind of positioned and they position licensure as an obstacle or a barrier to work. And we know that's not true. However, there are things in the arguments that are being put forward that we find need to be addressed because there are small elements of truth to some of them. I'd also want to say that there should be obstacles in the process because it's tied directly to public health, safety, and welfare. The other part that really drove the research was the changing stakeholder expectations and preferences. As we move quickly through COVID and seeing all the changes that are happening, many people are just becoming accustomed to having immediate results and seamless experiences. And this is something that we're seeing time and time again, where people are giving us feedback in the process. What I want to be clear about is that it doesn't really mean that we should ever concede safety for speed. But rather that we're living in an Amazon economy, and individuals expect responses and they expect interaction. And some of the time in our processes, even on our side, we seem to be finding some lagging responses there. And quick story I'd give you just from this week of myself with technology was I had to have my car repaired. It was bodywork. And, 10 years ago, I would have taken it into the shop and waited 2 days for an estimate and waited for another 2 days for them to start to work and kept calling them. And 2 weeks later, I might get my car back. Well, I dropped the car off on Monday and immediately got a text message that said we've started the process. And then 8 hours later said we've started the work. And then the next day that said we're halfway through. And then the third day said, hey, your car's done ahead of schedule, come get it. It wasn't the fact that I didn't want a good job done. It was the fact that they were constantly updating me and providing that information flow. And I thought that was a great example of how things had changed so quickly. Also, kind of tied to that, or shifting demographics, we have an entire new generation coming into the workforce, and their expectations about how things function and operate from a user end experience is also important. And we're seeing more of the complaints focusing on that friction piece that we talked about. So in general, like I said, our studies really aimed at friction, and removing friction from the process. I think it's important for us to define what we call friction and what we don't call friction. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So our definition of friction is on the screen, and for those of you who might not be able to see it, I'll just read it quickly. We see friction as steps, complications, and processes that don't have a direct impact on public protection. And that's how we define it and what we focus on in terms of friction. And I also want to be clear that friction is different from rigor. Rigor is an essential piece in the licensure process. Rigor includes necessary checkpoints that have a direct tie to public protection and through which not everyone will pass. We understand that rigor is there for a reason. And and licensure's traditional rigorous checkpoints have been the 3 E's that we always talk about. Education, and most of that is looked at in accreditation or having common standards around the curriculum that's put in front of people as they come through higher education. Examination through psychometrically defensible exams, national exam like we have with the LARE, and experience. And one of the other pieces CLARB's taking on is to get a more defensible understanding of what the quote unquote right amount of experience would be that would be tied to public protection, because there's variance there across the board. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So where does friction currently exist in our process? Before I talk about the friction points, I'm going to talk about how we collected the information so you understand we weren't just kind of making up as we went. CLARB engaged in benchmarking interviews with 20 different experts and professionals and collateral organizations to look at best practices and what's going on in licensing, processing, and regulation. We also held stakeholder interviews with exam candidates, board members, recent licensees, and several other individuals. And then there was an electronic survey that was administered to almost 2,000 respondents that included licensees and current and prospective licensure candidates and member boards. And so that data fed 4 basic categories that we identified, at least I call them, which I call inconsistency, redundancy, speed, and service. And when we look at the friction points where people perceive friction to exist, an inconsistency is obviously in having varying licensure requirements from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, which is we're going to talk about in some of the points we're going to refer to today in some of our proposed solutions, or at least exploration of solutions. Redundancy in the terms of having to fill out multiple applications or provide the same information more than one time in the process for candidates. Speed, the time to licensure, and this is not tied to gaining experience. This is tied to the communication and the speed it takes to turn things around within the process itself, from registering for the exam to applying to getting a response to getting approved. And then finally, we look at service. And for us, service is the customer service support side. And what CLARB has done is really take a step back and see the kind of service that we can provide to people as they come into CLARB's workflows. If you could go to the next slide, please. So one of the things I would also say is that we broke these out and have some things that we're exploring within the friction points. And I'm going to talk a little bit about them, but I also want to preface this by saying that keep in mind that these are all works in progress, and that we acknowledge it's going to take time and contribution and feedback from many stakeholders across the board. And not all of these will necessarily play out, but we feel that we need to do the due diligence to explore them. So in the 4 different streams we look at, we have policy, process, procedure, and service. And for us, on the policy side, we're looking at trying to find a way to harmonize standards, that there's more similarities between jurisdictions than there are differences, and that perhaps we can get to a uniform standard that would enable mobility. We're also taking a look at process changes, and that looking at those in a way to eliminate things like duplication of documentation from candidates and licensees. And that is where the whole concept of the uniform application came up. And we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail in the next few slides. Also, procedures. What can be done on the procedural side to increase the speed or the time to licensure? And we take a look at things like what we call administrative approval of licensure applicants that meet a predetermined set of requirements by boards, giving board executives the ability to check those off and potentially approve them and move them forward. And also the discussion about allowing applicants to directly register and apply to take the exam with CLARB. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today too. And finally, service enhancements, which I mentioned on the previous slide. These are things that we're looking at that can better assist our candidates in navigating the different portals and processes. And for example, one of the things that we've just done this summer is do a complete business process review and are looking for ways to improve and streamline our own processes at CLARB. So with that said, I just want to say that I understand that this project, how overwhelming this can feel, at least to me, and hearing all of this, maybe for the first time for all of you. And I know that a lot of the things we talk about, terminology can be confusing. And so I've asked Veronica Meadows, our Senior Director of Strategy, to talk through some of the terminology with us, and also to get us on the same page when we walk through some of the key elements that the LATC expressed some interest and concern about when Trish reached out to me and Mark reached out to me. And so specifically, we'll focus on the uniform application and candidate pre-approval, and then we'll take questions on our work in those areas from there. So I'm going to turn it to Veronica to take over on some of the details of those things.
Thanks, Matt. That was a great explanation and overview of the Rethink Regulation program. As Matt mentioned earlier, it's important for us all to kind of be on the same page in terms of the words that we're using and that we have a shared understanding of what those are. So just want to walk through what we mean when we say uniform standard. Really what we seek to establish is a common criteria for which all licensure applicants can be evaluated against, and that common criteria would be accepted and utilized in each of our member jurisdictions. As we talked earlier about some of the drivers behind the Rethink Regulation program, regulatory reform really begins to point out, or at least the folks behind the reform movement, proponents of reform, really tout the inconsistencies as a barrier, and particularly a barrier to mobility. So that is kind of the connection there with the development of a uniform standard of licensure, meaning that the 3 E's would be consistently applied across all jurisdictions. The uniform application is a single tool that would be used to collect and share applicant data between and with licensure boards. So the administrative approval is really providing, or the board granting the staff the ability to approve licensure applicants that clearly meet the standards for licensure. So, we'll talk a little bit about the standard path to licensure being an accredited degree in landscape architecture, passage of the LARE, and let's just say, X number of years of experience. If the applicant clearly demonstrates that they have met the qualifications for licensure, granting that administrative approval to the staff so that the individual can become licensed more quickly than having to wait to be approved by the board at a board meeting. And lastly, direct LARE registration. This is where qualified candidates would be permitted to register and take the exam directly with CLARB without having to wait for pre-approval by the licensing board. So these are the terms that we're going to be using pretty consistently throughout the rest of the presentation. So we wanted to share those with you, like I said, so that we could all kind of have a common understanding for what these words mean. Next slide, please. So Matt kind of gave you an overview of the 4 work streams that we're focused in over the next several years, and I want to drill down into the work specifically related to our policy changes that we are seeking to address the inconsistency in licensing requirements across our membership in the U.S. and Canada. We continue to work with our members to develop a uniform standard for licensure that all candidates can be evaluated against and can be implemented in all jurisdictions across our membership in the U.S. and Canada. As Matt mentioned, reducing friction is very different than jeopardizing or putting into risk any of the rigor that is necessary for a good licensing program and system. So education, experience, and exam would be the key components of that standard, with a real focus on better understanding truly what the experience requirement should be, because that's where we get the greatest amount of variation between jurisdiction to jurisdiction. You might see, just right around California, I think the only neighboring jurisdiction that has the same years of experience requirement is Nevada, but everybody else has a different amount, and really determining and drilling in on what should those years of experience be, and have a statistically valid data point behind that, so that if we were ever challenged by policymakers or whomever, legislatures, that we would be able to demonstrate a defensible requirement for that education piece, the experience piece. So that really kind of focuses in on the work that we seek to achieve within that policy stream of the Rethink Regulation program. If we could go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the details within the process changes that we seek to make to reduce redundancy in the process. And as we mentioned, we really are focused on the development of a uniform licensure application, so a tool that would be used to collect, and share applicant data across the membership. We hope that we can develop a uniform application that would contain all of the core information that all boards need to evaluate a candidate for licensure. We're looking at this through several lenses, several important lenses. One being, what is the true information, the true history and background of an individual that is necessary to evaluate them for licensure? And where are there potentially questions or information that we're collecting in the process that could interject unintentional bias into the system? I'll give you, a couple of examples of that. We ask for things like, in some jurisdictions, photographs of the licensee. Well, how could we justify how we use that photograph in evaluating that particular applicant for licensure? So there are some things that are being collected across the US and Canada that we kind of have to ask ourselves, is that truly necessary, or is that a vital piece of information that the board needs to determine that applicant's eligibility for licensure? And I think we have to be very aware of things that can interject unintentional bias into the system. We're hoping that we can implement the development and execution of this tool in phases. First, probably utilizing the council record and making changes to the record to collect that core set of data that boards need. And use the record as kind of our first iteration of what this tool will look like, but then ultimately have the ability to implement a technical or technological infrastructure that would allow for us to have two-way data sharing with boards. So, for example, if the candidate comes to CLARB and we collect the information, we can share that electronically with the board. But if the candidate comes to the board first, the board would then have the ability to share that electronically with CLARB. So that's that two-way data sharing as ultimately where we hope to get to with the uniform application, which is addressing our process changes. Next slide, please. And lastly, the last area where we want to drill into today is the procedural changes that we are proposing to address the time it takes to get licensed or the speed at which it happens. And as I mentioned, we're really talking about empowering staff to administratively approve applicants that clearly meet the standard for licensure. And secondly, enabling all candidates to register directly with CLARB to take the LARE without having to wait for pre-approval. So those are the procedural changes, and we're going to drill in specifically around the direct LARE registration, because I know that was an area in your letter that you specifically had some questions and concerns about, because we do realize and recognize that California does participate in that pre-approval process. So I'm going to stop right here and take some questions, if that's okay. That's a lot of information that we just, threw at you around this big program that has 4 different work streams. So just wanted to stop and see if there were any questions at this point.
Any questions?
Okay, great. Well, we'll continue on and drill into.
I have my hand up. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to ask one question. I mean, I know that different states have obviously different requirements. California probably has one of the most pathways to licensure, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because we have certain programs that we allow credit for that other states don't, or they don't even have those programs.
Right.
And examples would be our extension programs that we have for the 2 UC campuses,
Right.
As well as the community colleges pathway. So again, it's not that, let's put it this way. Back in the 90s, when we lost the California State Board of Landscape Architects, and then emerged a little bit later on as the Landscape Architects Technical Committee, new strategies had to be adopted and developed in order to be able to justify our existence.
Yeah.
So one of the things that had come out of that was that they felt that there was too many barriers to enter into the profession. When I say they, this was the California legislature at the time. So that's when we started to look at and develop new pathways that would allow more individuals access into the profession, which, just to reiterate what I just said, or repeat what I just said, other states don't have or may not have. Some do, some don't. But when we just went through our both education and experience reviews, we looked at every single jurisdiction across the country, and it was just amazing, the difference between them all, and trying to figure out which ones, were more along the lines of the way that our legislature was directing us to go. So I know what you're proposing is great, and I think in concept we can approve it, but it has to work within what our legislature directs us to do. We all operate and serve at the discretion of our elected officials, which change every several years. And sometimes with those changes come new rules, new regulations, and new hoops that we have to jump through. So I would just suggest that some of that be taken into consideration as well during these discussion points, because I'm looking at this and I'm going, wow, if it was a perfect world, this would be a great way to handle it. Or if we were all starting from zero and everybody was starting over, this would be perfect. This would be a great way to go. But we have to work with what we've got.
Yeah.
California definitely has their way of doing things, right, wrong, or otherwise, but it's what works for us. So anyway, with that, I'll keep quiet and let anybody else in the committee who might have an opinion or a comment.
Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, I just want to respond, because I think you bring up some excellent points, and so I'm still a newbie, right? So as I talk to people around in different jurisdictions, it's interesting that everyone is supportive of a uniform standard as long as it matches the one that they've already got, right? And I think that's the challenge for us. And I'm not sure there's going to be some nuance to this as we go forward, right? And so this is, often this can be seen as, taking away from the licensure boards what they should be doing, and that is not our case at all. Our case is that there's a common standard for the 90% plus of people that are coming into the profession, and there are still those spaces where local boards, jurisdictional boards, need to have the flexibility to do things like you're doing in California, and that's where the boards really come into play, and having those alternative paths that work in their jurisdiction. So there's a lot of room, and as we said, this is a research project, so we don't have the perfect solution. The other thing that I would say is that these are the exact. Your point about experience is something that's becoming a target for reform. And the kind of, when I looked across, just like you did, I scratched my head and say, well, why is it 2 years here and 4 years in a neighboring state? And people can get reciprocity going back the other way and not have that experience checked off. We have some jurisdictions like that. Those arguments, we're trying to, as part of our research at CLARB, we're trying to provide the groundwork in research, especially around experience now, that will help the licensure board say, look, this is research based. We should really think about maybe aligning a standard on experience, and say our research says that 3 years is the magic number. I don't know that it'll be that simple, but at least you have something to go to instead of just looking around the country and looking at other jurisdictions and asking them how they got there. We're trying to create some defensible standards, especially around experience, like we have for the exam for sure, and to a lesser degree, education. So I'll just leave it at that and let anybody else ask a question. But I think you just excellent points, and I'm making the same observations in my first year in the job as you are. So I appreciate them.
Yeah, I'd like to make, pose two questions, and the first would be that I know that this program is primarily looking at initial licensure, but I don't think that you can really separate that from reciprocity. And so I guess one question that I have is in working towards establishing what would be a quasi-standard set of criteria to qualify for initial licensure. What is the goal to make part of that standard the fact that there are maybe experience, like Andy was insinuating, experience only paths to licensure, that type of thing? Because I think in the long run, in order to establish a standard criteria across the board, we need to get that question answered right from the start. And then the second question that I have is, I know that as far as education goes, it's primarily focused on lab accredited programs. And there are many other programs out there that are not accredited, but are, equally, any foreign degree. Because I know I've talked with people that have received foreign degrees and they can't get licensed simply because it's not lab accredited. And I think that's an area that specifically needs to be addressed as well, that it's not strictly reliant on that particular accreditation when, especially as a lot of practice is going international. A lot of firms are hiring foreign trained landscape, people in the field, that type of thing. Because I think what it comes down to, it's strengthening the profession and not, limiting ourselves to a particular cohort or a particular pool of possible candidates in order to do that.
Yeah, John, I think you make, again, some really great comments. I think the work that we're focused on doing would recognize those alternative paths to licensure. You know, they're important, and particularly in this environment where we are trying to reduce friction in the process and reduce barriers to access. You know, that is a conversation that we're going to have. I think that right now, today, the way our population looks, they're very similar, the vast majority of them. I would say, and please don't quote me on this percentage, but it's close. 93 to 94% of the candidates that come through the licensure pipeline have an accredited degree, a lab accredited degree. And so I think looking to build your core standard, and you mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference between initial and reciprocal here in a second, but if you build your core standard to the uniform standard to kind of accommodate the majority, then it allows for the outliers or the ones that come through that alternate path to go to the board, and that's where the evaluation come in. That's where your subject matter expertise adds value to the process, because you're making determinations based on alternative education paths or an experience only path. I looked before our meeting. Currently, there are 26 jurisdictions that have an experience only path to licensure right now within CLARB. We just did a legal analysis of all of the education requirements across our membership. And so I think there's a good number of jurisdictions that feel very much like California does, that having alternate paths is important, because not everybody is afforded the opportunity to have a lab accredited degree, or, you know, life was different and they came through a different path, and they shouldn't be limited to their opportunity to licensure. So I think we're all saying the same thing. It's just a matter of how you get there and determining what are those alternative paths that are going to be, you know, we can all live with across our membership. In terms of the initial versus reciprocal, you know, if we can get everyone bought into an initial licensing standard that is, applied across the jurisdictions, then, you know, when an applicant comes to you, I mean, obviously this will take time, but you'll know that the applicant has come through and met the standard for initial licensure. My caution for having varying requirements between initial and reciprocal is it creates alternative paths to licensure that essentially promote shopping. So let's say I'm in a jurisdiction where the experience requirement is 4 years, but the neighboring jurisdiction, the experience requirement is 2 years. Well, if I'm savvy enough, and trust me, our candidates are savvy, I'm going to seek initial licensure where I only had to have 2 years of experience, and then I'll seek reciprocity back because the reciprocity standard is lower than the initial licensure standard. That discrepancy between the two is one that that creates vulnerability in our processes. So, you know, for all intents and purposes, we should have a standard for licensure, whether, you know, and then that way there is no discrepancy between whether you're getting licensed for the first time or the 50th time. You've met the standard for licensure. And it would create an opportunity to make mobility a lot easier. You know, we're seeing pop up all over the country too. The other piece of the reciprocity puzzle is, you know, uniform licensure recognition legislation. And I want to say that has been successfully implemented in even one of your neighboring jurisdictions in Arizona, which basically says if you're licensed anywhere else in the country, you can be licensed in Arizona, regardless of what requirements you were held to in that jurisdiction. If you hold a valid license without any discipline, you can be licensed in Arizona. So that legislation is popping up all over the place, and it has been passed in half a dozen jurisdictions, if not more. So the reciprocity issue the legislature may take care of for us, you know, because we're seeing a lot of push for that. You know, but I think it's important to think about licensure standards and not differentiate between whether you're getting your license for the first time or for the third time, that it's important that everyone be held to the same standards regardless.
And John, I'm going to comment on your international piece because I think it's critical, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. And then I'll let Veronica move on, I guess. That is something the CLAR Board of Directors is going to be wrestling with in terms of what does that look like outside of North America. And it's going to be something, as you noted, there's more international practice taking place, and not just the exporting of people with LAAB accredited degrees from North America outside. There are people with valid education that could be licensed in landscape architecture that can't. And I have, just so you know, I have pressed that issue with LAAB that there's a real opportunity and need potentially for accreditation of international universities to get them LAAB credited. That might be a great first step going down that path, is bringing them into that system. I don't know how quickly that will happen, but that is a conversation we've been having, and the CLAR board this is very much on their radar. So I just wanted to mention that before we moved on.
I'd like to make a comment. This has to do with the experience-only pathway that we're moving towards. We had a lot of discussions about this, and one of the items that people really had an issue with is that there's no structure for this experience-only pathway. And NCLARB, that is similar to CLARB, that's for architects, have a whole internship program in place. And it would really be helpful if CLARB would take a look at having some type of structure for that experience-only pathway, because I think you're going to see more and more states move in that direction. And, having something that's in place not only for the state, but also for that individual would be helpful, that they can kind of go through this checklist, so to speak, and start to accrue all the experience they need in order to sit for the exam.
Yeah, and that's a conversation that we've had across the organization for many years. The value of, understanding the value of, but also understanding the unintended consequences or some of the risks associated with structured internship programs. NCARB has, evolved that internship quite, but it's not an experience-only path, guidance through an experience-only path. It is applicable to anyone who is working through the licensure process for architecture. So, I think we'd want to be careful not to differentiate an internship checklist for someone coming through an experience-only path versus someone who has an education or a community college degree, or I think we'd have to really think through the risks and benefits of that. Because if we are very prescriptive in what that internship or what that experience component looks like, and a candidate can't achieve that because it's not available to them in their locality, or in order to gain that experience, they'd have to move to another state. I think we just have to really think through, all of the risks and benefits of, is it important to provide the structure, or is it important to have flexibility in gaining experience? And then ultimately, if you're able to pass the exam and demonstrate you possess that minimal level of competency, is that enough? So, there's value on both sides. And I agree with you 100%, Patricia. It's something that we need to have conversations about.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we can move on and move to the next slide, and we can talk a little bit about considerations for the board, for the LATC, in the conversations around allowing for direct LARE registration. And there's some data points that I wanted to share with you that I thought you'd find helpful in considering this particular way of perhaps maybe streamlining in California. So on the next slide, we have information that shows, I'm sorry, can we move to the next slide? Thank you. Have what direct registration looks like right now. So the jurisdictions that are noted in green, there are 40 that allow their candidates to, once they've completed their education requirement, to go directly to CLARB to register for the exam. So they're not having to wait to complete their experience requirement before they begin to test. We have 14 jurisdictions, California included, that require the applicant to be approved by the board prior to being admitted into the exam process. There are 4 of that 14 that are moving towards direct exam registration, and those are the ones that are kind of muted in that dark blue box: Maryland, Oregon, Texas, and Virginia. Those 4 jurisdictions have, at this point, their boards have approved movement in the direction, and so they're working on statutory or regulatory change to enable that in the coming months. But this just gives you a general understanding of kind of how the membership is divided in terms of direct exam registration and those that require pre-approval to be admitted into the exam. So if we can go to the next slide, just to show you where that lays out across, and what your neighboring jurisdictions are doing. Like I said, I have Oregon kind of highlighted there because while they are currently pre-approving candidates to sit for the LARE, they are working on their regulatory language changes that would need to be made in order to allow Oregon applicants to go directly into the exam process immediately following graduation. So just at a visual, so you can see how it looks across the country. And then if we go to the next slide, I wanted to share with you pass rates of candidates who are directly registering for the exam through CLARB, meaning they hold an accredited degree in landscape architecture and they have completed that degree. So they're able to register directly with CLARB. So that's what we call our direct registration applicants. The pre-approval are all the jurisdictions: California, Texas, Oregon, currently, the 14 that require the candidates to be approved by the board before being permitted to test, which oftentimes means that they're required to gain experience prior to testing. So if you look at the pass rates by those 2 cohorts of candidates, there's really no discrepancy in performance. So candidates that are being forced to get experience are being required to get experience before testing are not outperforming the candidates that are able to directly test with CLARB. So I wanted to share that with you because I know typically that's a question that most jurisdictions want to answer is, well, we want to make sure that our candidates are in the best possible position to be successful. And so we wanted to share that in many cases, the candidates that are directly applying are in some cases actually doing a little better. But again, it's insignificant. They're essentially performing exactly the same, those 2 cohorts of candidates.
This is Andy. May I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely.
Or this is actually, it's not a question, it's more of a comment. In California, we allow our candidates to take sections 1 and sections 2 right out of school.
Yep.
It's only sections 3 and 4 that would have that particular requirement.
Correct. Yes. So, but it's still, because we can't differentiate between 1 and 2 candidates and 3 and 4 candidates, it's either pre-approval or not pre-approval is, kind of the way that our systems are built right now, Andy. And so even though, yes, candidates can get into the exam process for sections 1 and 2 immediately after graduation, they still have to go through the pre-approval process. And then ultimately, obviously, if they want to take sections 3 and 4, they have to meet the 2-year experience requirement before the board will permit them to take those sections of the exam. Correct? Yeah. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. Here is what, just to kind of give you a sense of, and here's where we're talking more about that speed or timing, just to have an opportunity to see what the process looks like for the candidate if you're a direct applicant versus an applicant that must be pre-approved. And I just looked at California and Nevada because your years of experience are the same. You both require 2 years of experience. Now, several jurisdictions around you have a longer experience requirement. So if you're an Arizona, or a Nevada candidate, once you graduate from college, from your program, you can start your record register for the exam, be gaining all of your experience while you're testing. And once you've completed the exam, then you're ready to apply for licensure. And this is best case scenario based on, you've got an accredited degree and you've got your requisite experience. Whereas if you're, a California applicant, you really have to be gaining that experience first, particularly if you're sitting for sections 3 and 4, and then you can apply to the LATC. Then you've got to start your council record. Then you can register for the exam. Then you take those sections of the exam, and based on common candidate behavior, they're getting through the exam process in 18 months to 2 years. And then they're able to apply for licensure. So basically what this does is allow for the candidate to be gaining experience while they're testing all 4 sections. And I will tell you, the typical candidate behavior for getting through the exam process is taking them, one at a time. So essentially the candidate is already, the behavior is that they are gaining that experience that's necessary, particularly around the technical aspects of practice, very early on in their experience requirements so that they can be prepared to take the exam. They're applying what they've learned in school and they're getting out there and they're executing on that. So just based on, again, this timeline is based on best case scenario and typical candidate behavior. I mean, certainly there are variations, 100 different variations of this, but just to give you a general sense of the timing difference for, a direct applicant versus an applicant that is required to obtain pre-approval prior to being admitted into the exam process.
I'm sorry, I have a really quick question. In looking at this particular chart, has there been anything that has correlated having to repeat sections because candidates are failing to pass on the first go round? And on average, how long is it actually really taking candidates to get through the entire process, including retaking sections of the exam?
Yeah, and I think in the previous slide that I was showing, I think we generally see that the candidates are not performing any worse because they're allowed to, they're not being required to gain that experience first. We're really just not seeing much discrepancy in performance on the exam between the 2 candidate cohorts. The vast majority of candidates, as I mentioned, the behavior is they take the section sequentially. So they'll take 1, 2, 3, and 4. In terms of retakes, I mean, section 3 and 4 have the highest level of retake because it has a lower pass rate. But that lower pass rate is equally spread across whether you're a pre-approval candidate or a direct application candidate. But I think those are really important questions to ask is, what does the data tell us? What do we see in terms of candidate performance that would help us be informed to make good decisions about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, Veronica, you mentioned that it's the average is about 18 to 24 months for the full cycle of the 4 sections. So even with those that have a retake, they'll go through it basically, for the most part, 1 test per administration. And if you do 4 administrations in a row, you're a little over a year. If you have to do a retake or 2, you're closer to the 1.5 to 24-month mark. So it's going to vary by candidate, but on average, 18 to 24 months from start to finish. They don't like to drag it out. They want to get the exams behind them and keep going through it until they're all done.
So this is Trish. I wanted to clarify that with the section 1 and 2 pathway, candidates can gain their 1 year of experience during their study period. There is 1 year of experience that's required specifically under the supervision of a landscape architect after graduation. So they could qualify and take the layer after they gain that additional 1 year experience.
Okay.
So be at that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's worth a conversation for the LATC to consider or to at least weigh the risks and benefits of, allowing for California candidates to begin, to get into the licensure process. What benefits is the pre-approval, providing to the candidate, to the board, and what might the benefits be for allowing the candidates to directly apply and take the exam without having to go through the pre-approval process. Again, I just would encourage the board to think about, if the candidates aren't performing any differently, that might be, good information to consider in the conversation or in the decision making around, the potential for allowing California candidates to directly apply for the exam. And as I've shared with Trish, this would only apply to your candidates that have an LAAB accredited degree. The board would still have to pre-approve the candidates that came through those alternative pathways. So, because we have to have a uniform standard at the national level to ensure we know that an accredited degree is accepted in every jurisdiction as a means for meeting the education requirement. So we have our standard at that highest level so that anybody permitted into the exam process would not have any difficulties applying and meeting the requirements for licensure when they were ready to, apply for for licensure within the individual jurisdiction. So all of the other candidates, the UCLA Extension Program candidates, your experience-only candidates, all of the candidates that would go through that alternative path, the board would still be pre-approving those candidates to sit.
And I think that's a great point, Veronica, is that CLARB does not just let anybody take the test. We only accept qualified applicants for the exam. Those get filtered and screened. If they don't meet the requirements, they can't sit for the exam for a number of reasons, mostly because they shouldn't be, because they can't pursue licensure anyway. But the other part for us is not exposing the exam to people that aren't qualified and putting it at risk. The other question I would encourage the board, the committee to ask is the basic question of why. What benefit or what benefit do we think it brings by requiring applicants to wait 2 years before taking sections 3 and 4? And I know the simple answer might be, well, that's because what our regulation says. But what was the philosophy behind that? I'd be interested in understanding that, and maybe even you all want to have a conversation around that. That's always a great conversation to have about that philosophy of the wait period.
Well, I would like to comment on that. I think that you can look at the experience component as qualifying for the exam, but there's also the experience component that's going to take a much longer time for any candidate or licensee just to be exposed to the breadth of the profession and all the different situations that they're going to have to be addressing from a health safety and welfare standpoint. And that, we all know some people are much better at taking exams than others. And, someone could sit for this exam almost with no experience and figure out how to pass the thing. But does that really make them competent in order to, do work with the public when there's a chance that they're just simply because of a lack of general experience, they're going to miss things that could potentially lead to liability. So I think we definitely need to keep that in mind too. I know in this conversation we're talking strictly qualifying for examination, but there's also the other things that the state boards have to keep in mind too when they're willing to give someone a license. Are they truly qualified to address the public health, safety, and welfare?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, John. And And I don't think we are recommending, well, I will say we are not recommending that the experience requirement be, just done away with, just not in advance of taking the exam. So when the applicant came to you, they would still have 2 years of experience, and they would still have passage of the exam. It's just they would do those things concurrently as opposed to sequentially. So they'd still have the 2 years of experience that would be required. It just wouldn't, like I said, it wouldn't happen, in a sequential method, it would happen more in a concurrent way. Because yes, we agree, the 3 E's and upholding the rigor of the 3 E's is, very important and necessary to ensuring that we support members in, their mandate of, protecting the public through, the authority to issue a license.
And I think the other thing is looking at the 3 E's as co-equal requirements, not contingent on one another. And so the important thing is the order we found, as we've seen in some of the pass rates, doesn't really matter in terms of as long as you have all 3 components in place. Education happens on its own, the exam can happen on its own, and the experience can happen on its own. If you pass the exam and, let's just make up a person that's just great and can pass it in all 4 sections in a year in a jurisdiction that has a 4-year experience requirement, they're still not getting licensed till year 4 until that local jurisdiction feels that they've got the right amount of experience. And so I think this is one of those friction points. It is not, like Veronica said, any questioning of the need for experience. We are supporters of that and trying to actually find data that supports that and can embolden the use of experience as a requirement. It's just the friction of tying them together creates some confusion and frustration on the process side. So that's really what we're trying to get with, is we're not pushing back on the experience. In fact, some jurisdictions have much longer experience requirements, but let the candidates start testing from the beginning.
Patricia, oh, okay.
Was there a question?
No, I think I saw that Andy and Patricia had their hands up, but they took them down.
This is Andy. If I could just interject here for a second. One of the things that I'm not sure has been addressed or in this whole experience, when the experience is gained, is that the schools readily admit. I mean, we've interviewed all the schools in California, the UCs and the state colleges level, and they admit they don't teach to the exam, and they fully expect that their students are going to gain knowledge for the exam during that experience period. So when somebody first graduates from a program, they're not coming in as a project manager for the most part. They're coming in at an entry-level position. So it takes a couple of years for them to get to that project management position, which would then, in my mind anyway, make it that they've then gained enough experience and enough knowledge during that 2-year period of time that would then assist them in being able to successfully take the exam and pass it. It doesn't do anybody any good to be taking the exam straight out of school and failing it.
No, for sure.
Which is what ends up happening. And this is one of the problems we had when it was the State Board of Landscape Architects, when the legislature came to us and said, look, your failure rate is just not acceptable to us. And so we lost the State Board of Landscape Architects because partially due to that. That wasn't the only reason, but that was part of the reasons. So when we start taking a look at our pass-fail rates in the state of California, and we compare it to other jurisdictions, or let's say the nationals, and we can see how we're doing. And we always come back and say, why are we less than the national average in this area or that area or whatever? And it's always because the answer is because we have multiple pathways that other states may not have, and that we have additional hoops that have to be jumped through that maybe other states don't have. But we also have such a diverse population in California that other states may not have, where English may not be the primary language that these people have, but yet that's the language they have to take the exam in. So that means that then the pass rates then are possibly lower, but the legislature still looks at that when we do our sunset reviews. So and so we have to try to justify that and defend our pass rates compared to other jurisdictions. But yet we can't change the demographic of California. It is what it is. I'm not saying that I disagree with the idea of gaining experience while you're taking the exam. It's just I'm a little fearful, even though I fully appreciate the previous chart that you showed that said that there's no difference or very little difference between those who gain their experience while they're taking the exam and those who had to gain their experience before they were allowed to take the exam. But in my mind, I kind of struggle with that a little bit. I'm not saying that your numbers aren't correct. I'm just saying that really surprises me.
Well, Andy, I'll tell you something. It doesn't surprise me, and I'll tell you why. Because the candidate behavior is they take them sequentially. And if you think about the time it takes to get through the exam, they'll take section 1, and then 3 to 6 months later take section 2, then 3 to 6 months later take section 3. So I think the candidate's behavior is that they are prepping for 3 and 4. I mean, because we know they do better on sections 1 and 2 the closer they take it to their educational requirement. I think the candidates know that they need some experience to be successful in 3 and 4. We don't see a lot of folks that are coming through and taking 3 and 4 without having some level of experience, because even our own data tells us that they do better when they've had practical experience in those areas. And I think that's just the typical candidate behavior. So that's why it doesn't surprise me, because they're waiting anyway to take 3 and 4, but they're just they're able to do those two pieces concurrently versus sequentially. And so that's why I don't think we're seeing a huge discrepancy, because I think they're focusing or trying to focus as best they can that practical experience in those areas where they know they're going to need it.
And I can tell you from experience too, Andy, that my experience with other high stakes testing organizations, it's the same phenomenon, especially if you have several levels of examination. The sequential nature of them, people are gaining the experience while they're testing. The other thing that is important to note is that you can also encourage them and explain to them that the 3 and the 4 section are, you're going to have better success if you get more experience, because they're experience based. They're written by people that are out practicing. And so that's the other part of it is, if you want to help the candidate, you can explain to them you really want to take 1 and 2 first. Don't jump right into the deep end, because you're not going to have a lot of luck. And the other thing I would say about pass rates is, I always take them with a grain of salt for a couple of reasons. One, I think what you just noted about English as a second language in different jurisdictions, that's not necessarily a measure of someone's knowledge of landscape architecture. It's a measure of their knowledge of landscape architecture in English. And so I think that's one reason why you have to take that with a grain of salt. And I've done a lot of examination outside of the U.S. For other organizations, and the biggest obstacle has always been an English requirement. And in some cases, we've had to go to multiple languages, and you see things change there. The other thing I would say about pass rates is it's important that some people fail. And I say, I know that sounds a little harsh, but the exam is a checkpoint. It is a place where the people that are not ready to be licensed in practice don't pass through the checkpoint until they are ready. So I think there's we get concerned when pass rates get too low. And I always have said in high stakes testing that the person that passes and the person that failed, the impact that has on public safety is the same. Because the person that's not getting into the field to practice, when they're not ready and not demonstrating the knowledge, shouldn't be practicing, and that's okay. And it also serves as an educational point for them to show them where their gaps are, so that they can move forward and understand what they've got to work on and learn through experience or additional education. So that's my me on my soapbox about high stakes testing. So I apologize. It's something I'm a little bit passionate about, but it's definitely an important part of what we're all doing. So the great commentary and great discussion. Appreciate it.
Andy?
Right, Mr. Chair. Just one other thing, another point I'd like to bring up, and I don't know if this is just our particular firm or if it's our area of the country or if it's California wide. I don't know. And John and Patricia and Susan, I'd ask you guys too. But in our firm, we have a heck of a time trying to get our employees to take the exam, even 2 years with experience. They want to wait till 10 years of experience before they even attempt it. I can't understand that. I mean, I know that when I was in school and I graduated, I mean, I was counting literally every hour towards that 2-year experience until I qualified. And the day that I qualified, I turned in an application so that I could take the exam. But I don't see that as being the way it is today, at least here in our area. John, I don't know, what's your experience with that? Have you seen any difference, or Patricia?
Yeah, I think it's more the culture of the firm that kind of dictates when people take the exam. I have a person that just took the exam and he has 20 years experience. And, I pretty much explained to him that this firm is based on getting licensed. So you're not going to go anywhere if you don't get licensed. I think that's a pretty standard thing in general, but I do think the culture of a company kind of has influence over that. So what I've seen in our firm, all the young people are kind of competing with each other to take it. They're very cognizant of what the requirements are, and there's almost like a little bit of competition.
Mm-hmm. Susan?
Yeah, sorry, I have construction going on here, guys, so I missed a little bit of what's said, but what I'm finding is when you're in a firm and there's a lot of people, there tends to be not as much of a push right away to get licensed. But if you're out like me as an independent person, you want to get licensed as quickly as you can. So I think the firm culture does make a difference in when and how you're going to take the test. One of the other things I wanted to comment on, and I'm sorry if someone already mentioned this, but if you sign up and get qualified, you have the ability to take 1, 2, 3, and 4. You don't have to wait to take 3 and 4. And my concern is, like, I'm not a great test taker, but I can do good in my profession. So if someone's just a really good test taker, they pass the test, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be completely qualified. And I think, too, my comments go mostly to an independent person who's going to go out and work on their own. So that's one of my concerns is you sign them up early that they can take everything, be a good test taker and pass instead of having more experience.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from my experience, it's kind of dependent on how ambitious the person is. If they've got sort of a clear idea in their mind of they definitely want to be licensed at some point, they're a little more motivated, whereas other people are perfectly fine just essentially doing the grunt work in the firm and not worrying about if they're licensed or not.
Yeah, those are all really great comments, and I think it's interesting to see the difference in behavior, candidate behavior, kind of firm to firm, in the same state. Of course, obviously California is enormous, and there's lots of variation there. Susan, to your point, I don't think we're recommending, and we're not recommending that the experience requirement not be adhered to, because that's an important part of the 3 E's. It's an important part of the rigor that goes behind the licensing requirement. So just because they be permitted to test early, even if they, let's just say we had an amazingly smart graduate who walked out, took all 4 sections in the first admin, say they graduate in May, they take all 4 sections in August, they pass all 4 sections, they'd still have to meet the experience requirement for licensure. They wouldn't miss out on that. They wouldn't be permitted to skip that. It just would allow for the candidate to test while they're gaining the experience, so that, if they do it concurrently and they're gaining the experience that they need and testing and being successful, then at the end of that 2-year the 2-year experience requirement, they're able to, seek licensure versus start testing for 3 and 4. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm also concerned that by having these experience-only pathways, what are we doing to the school programs? What are we doing to the college programs? I mean, as colleges get more and more expensive, if I can be working and making 80 to 100 grand and be working versus spending 50 to 60 in loans and fees to go to a good college. So I think we've had this discussion before of how does it affect the programs? And that, because to me, there's still a benefit of an education, and you become a little more well-rounded in experience and exposure. And I do a lot of plan checking and review of drawings for what I'm part of my work and part of the fact that I'm working for a city part-time. And I see people who are licensed that I really question their qualifications. And the tests have become a written only exam, and no drawing of drawings, there's no interpretation of drawings, where our whole thing of being licensed is that we draw drawings, that we can prepare plans and specs and irrigation and planting. So we're trying to get all these people to be inclusive, which is a good thing. But at the same time, when it comes down to you're sitting there with a set of plans, reviewing them, you're kind of wondering, how did this person get licensed? They don't even know the simple ADA requirement of a pathway kind of thing. So I'm very concerned where education is that going to kind of fall out of this experience when more to experience only. And we've also allowed all these other professions into landscape architecture to get credit for years, like as a geologist or something. So
yeah. I mean, I think those are all big questions that, as we think about the development of a uniform licensing standard, we have to weigh, the risks and benefits, the risks of potential impact to, public harm, and, also the benefit of having an agile and adaptive standard that can be achievable by people of all different types and all different opportunities. So, I mean, those are definitely conversations that, will certainly, need to be had within CLARB, across the CLARB membership, as we move forward with the development of the uniform standard. I will tell you that the basis by which we intend to develop the uniform standard is on education, experience, examination. And as I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of the candidates that come through the licensure pipeline, 93, 94% of them have an accredited degree in landscape architecture, have passed the exam, and have met, the requisite experience requirement under the direct supervision of a landscape architect. So again, we want to develop a standard for the mass, but we also want to develop a standard that can be flexible and can allow for alternate paths, so that people that wouldn't have, say, for example, the opportunity to attend a 4 or 5 year LAAB accredited degree program, that there is a path for them. It may look a little different, and there may be, other things that have to happen to demonstrate competency, but to completely, just to dismiss, the opportunity or the potential for an alternative path, I think is one that we certainly have to grapple with as we work towards the development of a uniform licensure standard that all jurisdictions can kind of live with.
Side question. Sorry, John, I didn't raise my hand here. You okay? Follow the protocol.
Yeah.
Now I forgot what I was going to say. It'll come back to me.
Okay, well, I was just going to say that schedule-wise, let's continue with the presentation, and then
John, you kind of blanked out there.
Yeah, you froze for a while, John.
You suddenly went incognito.
Yeah, my little thing on him is spinning here that he's not on.
I think our next slide was questions anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we've already done that.
If I could just make one or just ask a question, and this is to both Veronica and to Matt. I mean, again, in the previous slide, you showed, the perfect world where you've got the 2 years of education running concurrently with taking the exam. Do you have a metric as to how many people have actually been able to accomplish that? In other words, they graduated school, they got a council record, started the process, got a job immediately, worked for the 2 years, and at the end of the 2 year period of time, they had passed the exam and had gained their experience, and so that they were licensed in whatever jurisdiction.
Not off the top of my head, but we have the average time to licensure. And Andy, I think the other part of that is the added step. I think it's when we talk about friction, it's the added step of the application for approval from the state board to then be able to go to CLARB and apply and then go through our process. And I think the point is removing that friction point is something that's also slowing it down. And that was where we were looking at it from the perspective of friction too.
Well,
so I can get the answer to that question. If
I'd like to ask a question of Trish Rodriguez then, or Laura, what is that time period? I mean, so let's say somebody applies to the LATC. How long is that period of time that it takes to verify that they're eligible to take the exam?
I would say it's just a matter of a couple of weeks.
Okay, so we're not talking like it's a huge barrier or a large period of time, or I mean, and Matt, I certainly understand your point about a friction point, and we obviously what we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce friction and streamline efficiencies and make this as painless for everybody as possible. I could certainly understand it if this was adding 6 months to a year to the process, but if it's only adding a couple of weeks, I'm not sure that it's that big of a friction point, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, it's also adding confusion and unnecessary complication. I think from the candidate's perspective, they look at it as I've got to apply here, I've got to wait, I've got to apply here, and why am I being asked the same questions to do the same thing? And so it's from that candidate experience perspective. And we'll get you the numbers on how many people can actually move through that quickly and the average time to licensure. So, and I think the other thing is, it's part of the kind of the larger construct of trying to create a seamless process for people going through. And again, I just ask the why question, the philosophical why does that exist for pre-approval? Why does pre-approval exist, and what is it trying to encourage?
Trish, is California or is the LATC asking for additional information that CLARB does not?
So CLARB asks for the transcripts and the experience. I'm not sure how much experience their requirements are, but we have the 6 year total. So I don't believe it's different. The variation is in the alternate pathways. I just want to remind the members that we are going through the business modernization process, which I believe will address some of the friction as it's been defined here, where candidates that do apply through LATC will be able to exchange that information between CLARB and the committee. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Yes, John, I have one question. And I'm asking this because I have a lot of young people in the office that, oh goodness, they ask me this, and it's not always real clear. So, you know, the question is, does someone have to, someone in the state of California, can they just go directly to LATC, sign up for the exam and take it? Or do they have to, you know, go and join CLARB and then also go through the process with the state?
So that's, sorry.
Go ahead.
That is, I think, where they are, they have identified that friction point where candidates do have to come to LATC first to become pre-approved in order to take the exam. Since CLARB administers the LAIR, they have to register with CLARB in order to take those sections of the LAIR. Once they complete the national exam, pass all of the sections, then they would apply for the supplemental exam with the LATC.
So Patricia, you're having the candidates come to LATC is not circumventing or removing the requirement to start their council record and register for the exam at CLARB. They have to do that regardless. Every candidate who takes the exam has to complete the council record because that is the application to take the exam. So when they come to LATC, that part still has to happen. It's, you know, 2 steps instead of 1. So essentially what the process would look like if candidates were direct application in California. Once they graduated, they would start their record, they'd begin the exam, and California would see them when they applied for initial licensure. So that would be the time in which the evaluation by the LATC would occur, would be for initial licensure after the exam and the education and the experience was all completed. Right now, the way I understand it, Trish, please correct me if I'm wrong, you're pre-evaluating them for licensure, basically saying, yes, you're granted licensure if you pass the exam as part of the exam approval process, correct? Is that how it works?
That is correct. But another perspective of that is that we do maintain all of those records that they submit to us here, including their transcripts and experience documents. We do maintain it with their license record once they are licensed and up to 50 years after their license is either canceled or expired. In getting pre-approval first, if a candidate does not qualify for any reason, they are allowed to then go, for example, gain the remaining experience they might need and then obtain the council record without having established the council record, potentially, really not getting the benefit of having that council record in place, aside from having submitted their qualifications to them. I think the biggest benefit would be for someone who is seeking reciprocity in other jurisdictions, where the council record then is a tool that is used in making that process easier for those that want to become licensed elsewhere.
Patricia, can I?
Yes.
Can I ask a question? Okay, I go ahead and speak. Someone's microphone must be on because it's causing echoing. So a question for Matt and Veronica. Can you give us a little bit more data about the trending that the states, the jurisdictions moving towards or retreat from the direct registration, let's say in the past 2 years. So it looks like the majority of states has this direct registration policy, right? The state like California is a minority few. So we would like to see past the 2 years of a trending from other jurisdictions. You have the data here with you.
I think Veronica could tell you in the last 2 years which jurisdictions have moved that direction. And in fact, I believe Oregon is moving that direction very soon. Veronica, can you speak to off the top of your head, which of those have moved in the last several years?
On the West Coast, Hawaii is probably the most recent. The Hawaii is definitely the most recent. So are you asking for performance data, pass rates before, like when they were pre-approval, and now that they're direct application, seeing the both performance data for both time periods?
No, I just asked the jurisdiction's policy change from, for example, previously they have a pre-approval process. Now they're taking on a direct registration approach. If you could get that, I don't expect you to memorize all that. After 2 years, some kind of serve as our reference to look at why other states are moving towards certain direction.
Yeah.
You have I think the slide, Veronica, that you had, the pie chart and the map as well, called out not the most recent, but the ones that we anticipate will be moving as well. And there's, I think, 5 of them that we're hoping that we'll be considering it in the next, several years, so a year or two. So I don't know if we could bring that slide back up. That might be helpful to illustrate that point.
And we do know, so it's Texas, Maryland, Oregon, and Virginia. Those are the 4 jurisdictions that are moving from pre-approval to direct exam application. 2 of those jurisdictions, Texas and Maryland, it's going to take statutory change. They're going to have to go to their law and make the change in their law. But in both jurisdictions, it's a relatively painless process. In Oregon and in Virginia, it's regulatory, and in Virginia, it's just basically administrative procedural. So, there's not any type of, regulatory change in Virginia needed. In Oregon, it is a regulatory change. So that's really going to be if the LATC ever decided to move in that direction in terms of, I don't know where the language exists around the specificity of that, whether it would be a regulatory change in California or a statutory change. But here's the slide that you can see right now. It's 40 direct application, 14 pre-approval. And, in a matter of a couple of months, we'll be at 42 and 12. And probably within the year, we'll be at 44 and 10. And also 2 of the pre-approval jurisdictions, British Columbia and Alberta, are Canadian provinces, and they do pre-approval not to enforce a experience requirement prior to testing, but to ensure, because they are a membership organization, they are the professional societies for landscape architecture in Canada. They manage both the professional society, work and the regulatory work. And so that is a membership related thing. They want to make sure that their associate members that are testing in their provinces are associate members. It's not a requirement to meet experience requirements prior to testing. It's just simply to make sure that they've come in through the appropriate membership channel. So, I think we're really talking about, a small number of jurisdictions that are managing the candidate process in this way, and it seems that the vast majority have kind of moved in this direction. And if there was one standard process across all jurisdictions, it would eliminate some of the some of the confusion and variation, which I think is one of the key points that our Rethink program is trying to address is that variation. But I know we are like really, I know we're up against your lunch break, and I wanted to have the opportunity to just share quickly some information about the annual meeting. We are happy to follow up. Trish, if there's a list of data points that the committee would like us to gather, if we can, we're happy to do that. If there's, if it's worth having a subsequent conversation, we're certainly happy to do that as well. But I do want to, be respectful of the time we've taken on your agenda to this point. And, I know you guys are probably getting hungry too.
Thank you so much, Veronica. We've actually, we're having some technical issues with our chair. And so if there aren't any other questions, I really want to thank both you and Matt for your presentation. And I think this might be a good time to take a 10-minute break.
Sorry,
yeah.
Trish.
Go ahead.
Again, I got construction going on outside my door. I don't know that this is an item for discussion, but I'd be interested to hear back from Clarb if, let me step back a second. So what I've been seeing is you pass the test, you're licensed, you can go out on your own, you can have your own office. But there really is level of the profession. One is in the public sector and one is in the more residential and private sector. And so just as a question, has there been any consideration of having a breakout of the license like they do in civil engineering, where you could be a civil engineer, mechanical engineer, or electrical engineer? So I don't know that we need to discuss it, but I just would be interested if there's any future feedback on kind of more of a technical higher level of licensing for public work projects.
Well, I can address that. I think very generally. And next year, we're conducting a new job task analysis, which basically surveys the profession, it surveys the practice, and especially the regulated practice that's out there. If we ever got feedback in a job task analysis that there was a need for a separation or a specialization or another discipline, then we would most certainly consider that, and we'd have to take that to our board. As I understand it, and Veronica can correct me, I've only been here 10 months, we have not seen that kind of need yet in the landscape architecture space. Now, that doesn't mean that there hasn't been discussion about specialty exams that could demonstrate, skills in a particular area of landscape architecture, but we've not come across that yet. And I know I know what you're talking about. The NCAAS, the engineers, they have 27 different disciplines that have licensing exams. So they're a pretty broad profession. When you say engineer, you could mean just about anything. But we do look at that every 5 years when we cast the JTA out for the profession.
And forgive me for not knowing more, but does that go out to like public agencies, or does it just go out to landscape architects in the profession? Because I see it from the public review process. I mean, when you're talking, a landscape architect could be signing a SWIP drawing, a recycled water drawing, an ADA drawing. Where is the licensing level of expertise for that? So this is more kind of heads up, look out. I see that there is a need for some level of specialty, but I'm the only one who keeps bringing this up. Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
And thank you so very much for having us attend your board meeting today. And like I said, if there are data points that the committee would like to have, we can certainly, work with Trish to gather that information and share that back to the committee. And again, happy to have subsequent conversations with you as well. I hope you all have a great long holiday weekend. And thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Yeah,
would you like to break perhaps for lunch at this point?
yes.
Okay. It's 12:03. Come back at 12:30.
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds
We
good.
just go mute.
This is the moderator, so you don't have to log out. All you have to do is make sure your microphone is muted and go ahead and turn off your camera.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I guess bring the meeting back to order. And we will move to item G2, review CLARB September 10th, 2020 virtual annual meeting agenda. And I will ask Trish to present that item.
Okay, thank you. So attached in the packet is the first virtual annual meeting that CLARB will be having this year. It will be 11:30 Eastern time, so 8:30 our time. In the agenda, they'll cover the 2021 job task analysis, so I'll touch on that briefly under our agenda item J later in the meeting. They'll also provide an update on remote proctoring. CLARB conducted a pilot on remote proctoring due to COVID-19, and the pilot included jurisdictions from Canada. So we'll get an update on that, and I will bring that back to the next LETC meeting. And then under elections, announcements, and leadership nominations, we should identify, both Laura and I will be attending the virtual meeting, which member will be able to attend so that we can complete the items under agenda item 3, which are the elections for the Board and Leadership Advisory Council. So I'll move on to item G3, and then we can discuss who might be able to attend the meeting. So in June, CLARB released the final slate of candidates for the 2020 Board of Directors and Leadership Advisory Council elections. Attached for your reference are the final slate of candidates and each candidate's respective biography. Also attached is CLARB memorandum regarding letter of delegate credentials for the 2020 CLARB annual meeting, along with the template credentials letter, which provides voting representatives and the 2020 elections ballot, which staff will complete and submit to CLARB. The LATC's completed ballot and credentials letters must be submitted to CLARB by September 7th. Election results will be announced during the business session at the virtual 2020 annual meeting. The committee is asked to review the final slate of candidates for the 2020 Board of Directors and Leadership Advisory Council and take possible action in determining how the LATC will vote in the election.
Okay, so I guess, well, the first question is, does anyone on the board have any questions for Trish, initial questions in regards to these items? Okay, hearing none. I'm not sure.
Sorry, John, I just have one question.
Sure.
So I'm just noticing, you know, the format that was used for the candidate interest form. And for Julie Hildebrand, yeah, I was just kind of surprised that, you know, for her education, they say law degree, they don't say where she got it. And then for license, they just say law license, and they don't say where she's licensed. You know, typically, all the other candidates have more information, so I guess I was just found that somewhat odd.
Yeah, I would assume that she's her law license must be with the state of Texas, given that that's where she's residing. But other than that, I agree.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Julie Hildebrand is the executive director for the Texas Board of Architectural Examiners. She's not a licensee.
Okay. Okay. right. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Are there any questions or comments from the public?
This is the moderator, and just to point out that looks like Andy lost his audio, so you may have missed out on a little of his commentary. He's still logged in, so we'll go ahead and open up the panel for questions and comments while he give him a chance to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the question and answer panel is now available. If you would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," and submit it to all panelists in the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We are displaying instructions for your reference. And if you do not see the Q&A panel, please click on the question mark within a square at the bottom middle of your screen. All right, this is the moderator, and I'm seeing no requests for public comment at this time. Would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, and it looks like Andy still does not have his audio connected yet.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess the rest of us can start the discussion in regards to who on the committee may be available to attend as the committee member. Or we can wait until we have Andy back.
Yeah,
John,
Yes.
I have an all-day meeting on the 10th, so I would not be able to participate.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No, that's so noted.
okay. I have a 9 o'clock meeting, so I could participate after, I would say 9:30 or 10. Ideally you have somebody that'll be there the whole time. And we're sure it starts at 8:30, is that correct?
It actually starts at, well, you know what? It doesn't say what time zone these times are for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would assume these are probably Eastern times.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. The other issue is the California Architects Board meeting is happening, I believe, that week as well, and I have already volunteered to attend that. So it would be difficult for me to attend both.
This is Laura. We're the Architects Board meeting is going to be the following week, the 18th.
Okay, the 18th. All right.
Time
All
on
right.
the 18th for the Architect Board. What time on the 18th?
I believe
10 o'clock, I believe.
Yeah, 10, but it's probably going to be similar to this, pretty much an all-day meeting once it gets started.
And how long does it? Because I have a 2 o'clock on the 18th. If that's something you don't would like me to be part of, but I'd have to get off at 1:30.
Right.
I think right now we're trying to figure out who's going to attend the CLARB meeting.
Right.
Is there any kind of agenda associated with the CLARB meeting? I mean, do we know exactly what's happening at 8:30?
It looks like from 8:30 to 12:30, it's an optional pre-meeting discussion. The actual annual meeting itself would not start until, I think, 10 o'clock our time.
If it's the actual meeting starts at 10 o'clock, I could attend.
Mm-hmm. All right. So if you're willing to do that, should we make a motion then? Call for a motion to approve Patricia Trouth as delegate and Trish Rodriguez and Laura Zuniga as representatives in attendance on the letter of delegate credentials for the September 10th, 2020 CLARB annual meeting.
I'll make that motion.
All right. Do I have a second? I guess I'll second it. Okay.
Sorry, Andy is advising that he has already signed up for CLARB.
Oh, he has.
Yes, he's having trouble getting back into the meeting, so we could be having bandwidth issues, and I'm wondering if, unless you are a member or speaking, if we could ask you to turn off your webcams.
Oh, okay.
Susan, you could keep yours on.
Oh, I can keep mine on?
Yeah, I'd like the members to keep their webcams on, and
Okay.
if anybody else is speaking, please turn it on at that time.
I'm back on. Sorry,
There he is.
the system cut me off and I wasn't able to get back on, but now I am. But I just want to let everybody know that I signed up for the CLARB conference several days ago.
Okay.
So, I'm all set, ready to go, unless somebody else has a burning desire to do it. But I was planning on doing it, but
Okay. Well, if that's, we did have an initial motion. Patricia had volunteered, but we can withdraw if Susan's willing to withdraw that motion.
Withdraw the motion.
Mm-hmm.
The seconder needs to withdraw also.
Okay, well, that was me, so I withdraw. All right, so I'll call for a new motion to approve Andrew Bowden as the delegate and Trish and Laura as representatives in attendance on the letter of delegate credentials for the September 10th, 2020 CLARB annual meeting.
I'll make that motion.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Patricia seconds. All in favor? John Roshinsky, aye. Susan Landry,
Aye.
Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
and Andrew Bowden.
aye.
Okay, the motion carries. We will
Just
move.
a question. I had signed up for it also, so is there any problem with two people attending?
I'm not sure. Could you address that, Trish?
Yeah, I don't believe so, but I will go ahead and confirm with CLARB. There's no issue on our end, but I will just advise that we have two members that are interested in attending in addition to Laura and I, and I'll just confirm with Patricia after the meeting.
Yeah, my understanding is that there's not a limit, although only one person is eligible to vote. Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, let's move on to item 3, review and possible action on 2020 CLARB Board of Directors and Committee on Nominations election ballot. And Trish, if you would present that item.
Included in the packet are the bios for each of the candidates. So hopefully everybody's had an opportunity to review those. The Leadership Advisory Council used to be the Nominations Committee, so they're just changed a name only. And the slate of candidates for president-elect is Bob Fenderson and Chuck Smith. And Leadership Advisory Council, Julie Hildebrand, Bob Mercier, and Carrie Redundancy.
I will open committee discussion on this item. Any of the committee members have any initial comments or questions?
John, this is Tian. Just curious, over the years, has any members of our board was nominated or elected at the national leadership?
Yes, they have. I know that Stephanie Landrigan has been involved in the past, as well as
Christine, who's one of the past presidents.
yeah, Christine Anderson has been involved as well.
And I was one of the district alternates.
Mm-hmm. I know one of my initial questions that I had was in regards to I guess the request for nominations. Does anyone know if CLARB actively goes out to the boards and asks for nominations as part of their process, or is it just strictly on a volunteer basis that those individuals on their own submit an application?
If I might be able to answer that for you, John?
Yes.
That's the Committee on Nominations. They're the ones who make the discussions as to who they feel might be potential candidates, and then they'll approach those candidates. But I think any board or member board can submit names of individuals that might be interested in serving,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to go through a vetting process. So, but they do ask.
Okay. Because I was going to say I have reached out to CLARB to offer to volunteer, but my understanding is that because of the application and vetting process, that the earliest that I would be eligible to serve would essentially be a year from now. And so that's, I do see that one of the candidates for the Leadership Advisory Council is from here in California, but I'm not aware of her actually being involved in anything specific to the LATC. It looks like she volunteered as to serve on an exam committee with CLARB and has essentially, I guess, been nominated internally to CLARB for that reason. And I was just curious if anybody knows her or has heard of her or what her actual background is, or
John, this is John. I noticed last night when I reviewed the package, and I don't recall this person's involved at any capacity with us. That's why actually I raised this earlier questions. Now I recall, yeah, Christine was the president 3 years ago or so. But anyway, should the leadership grow out of our board, or is it not necessary?
Well, I always kind of assume that most of the people that serve are actually on a licensing board in their state, but I guess apparently that is not the condition. I know that I spoke with Trish and reviewed some materials that our committee reviewed last year in regards to some changes in the CLARB nomination process. And I think one of the issues that was intended to address was the fact that the pool of candidates has been shrinking, and they were looking at opening up opportunities to others other than board members to participate.
I just want to add to that also what John was saying. I believe it was maybe 2 years ago, CLARB changed their bylaws, and that had to be voted in. And I attended remotely, but that was a pretty dynamic conversation that occurred. But CLARB did change their bylaws, and I guess it's now can have others besides people that are involved in the various boards. And the other thing that changed was that you don't need to be a landscape architect, a licensed landscape architect.
Andy?
I attended last year's conference in St. Louis with Trish, and pretty much what Patricia just mentioned is exactly what the new structure is. So they, they're looking for fresh people to be able to go through the process. The way it used to be is that you would start off as secretary, or actually a regional director. So you'd start off as regional director, then you'd move up to secretary, then vice president and president, and then immediate past president. So it ended up being a 5 or 6 year commitment, because I think regional director was a two-year term. And they were finding there were a lot of people that were resistant to committing to a 6 year time frame. So they needed to change how that all happened. So hence why they're going through this right now. So as to that one individual that you were just mentioning, what's her name here? Hang on, I'm scrolling down. Carrie, I can't even begin to pronounce her last name. She needs a couple of vowels in her name. She only has one vowel. It's at the very last letter of her last name. Anyway, so we'll just call her Carrie. She apparently had CLARB experience. She was part of the LAIR prep committee and CLARB liaison in 2020. So that was her connection to CLARB. But as you said, she has no connection to the LATC. So even though she's a Californian by registration, she doesn't have much CLARB experience. So we would, take that into consideration when we're casting our vote.
Mm-hmm. Well, should we go through, I guess, begin with the candidates for president-elect and decide which one of the two that we would like to support?
Chime in, I guess. What I find interesting is the way they rank themselves in the leadership competencies. And Robert lists number one as working collaboratively, and then Chuck listed as number 4. But they both rank 9, exercise oversight versus supervision. And so I found the ranking to be very interesting in how they rate themselves. And it almost, my leaning right now is towards Chuck.
This is Andy. I happen to know both of these guys from last year's meeting. And while I don't know either of them well, I would lean more towards Chuck as well. You know, he's well spoken and presented himself well when he spoke in front of everybody last year in St. Louis.
Mhm.
I mean, both of those two have great CLARB services as well as other service. So, I mean, you know, it's kind of a toss up between them. But, you know, having met Chuck and talked to him at some, you know, some length during one of the lunches, I would lean more towards him. That's not to take anything away from Bob Gunderson, just that I don't know him.
Right. I guess one question that I would have when we decide this is, given the current CLARB initiative to that was presented to us earlier, which one of these two candidates do we feel would better represent our interests in regards to that? Having not been involved in CLARB, it would be difficult for me. But I would think that we would be looking for some, you know, sensitivity to the issues that we have addressed, and that you know, which of the two candidates that we feel kind of better aligned with that would be the one that I would be willing to support.
Not knowing any of that information other than what's presented here in the packet.
Yeah.
I would still lean towards Chuck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that you know, his service, particularly with the young life leader, I think that says a lot about him, because you know, a lot of what CLARB is doing is working with, you know, emerging professionals. So yeah, Jeff would have my vote as well.
Okay. Well, are we ready then to make a motion on who we? Well, I'll hold off on that for right now. Let's move on to the three candidates for Leadership Advisory Council, and I guess my point would kind of be similar in regards to who we think are gonna, you know, best represent California's interests on this.
I think for this category we select two.
Yes, two out of the three.
2 out of the 3.
Mm-hmm.
So in my viewpoint, Julie Hildebrand and, let me scroll down, and Bob Mercer seem to be the two candidates that have the most experience both in CLARB and ASLA, and just by virtue of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the remaining candidate, which is Carrie, and I'm not going to try to pronounce her last name, but she seems to be kind of a younger individual who doesn't have quite as much years behind her as far as service to CLARB or any of the other organizations as well.
Mm-hmm.
But she did work on the exam. She was part of 4 different sections of review of the CLARB.
True. But when you see board service, it's blank, nothing there. And other service is just, you know, extension teacher in construction and, you know, PTA elementary school kind of activity. So really not a whole lot of experience. When you look at the other two, they have a lot of experience. So to me, that kind of says a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you balance that against having someone in California versus not in California?
To me, it doesn't matter where they reside, you know, where they call their home. I mean, unfortunately, Carrie has not served on the LATC. She hasn't, as far as I know, she hasn't attended LATC meetings. I've not heard her name prior to this. I've not heard her name, you know, as it applies to ASLA. So, I mean, she's kind of an unknown entity. That doesn't, not to take anything away from her. She may be very qualified, but I'm just saying, based on the information that is presented before us, I'd have to lean towards the other two just because they seem to have more of a depth of experience.
I'll go with what you are thinking on that line of thinking, Andrew.
Yeah, I guess the only comment that I would have is I think faced with the initiative that's going on right now, it's probably really important to have people that have been involved in that process to some extent already and have a clear understanding of sort of what they're intending, and you know, rather than have someone step in that you know, may not be up to speed on all the specifics and how boards work and that type of thing. And clearly, the other two candidates, I'm looking at Bob Mercier, and I see that he. I don't see any direct indication that he has served on the licensing board in Mississippi, but he obviously has been involved in this work for a bit longer and everything. So I, based on the discussion, if everybody is comfortable, I'm ready to make a motion or to ask for a motion to support Chuck Smith for president-elect and Julie Hildebrand and Bob Mercier for the Leadership Advisory Council.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, a second. Okay, any further comments or discussion from the committee?
I do have one comment, John.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're reading it correctly, but Bob Mercier or Mercer, or however you pronounce his last name, he did serve on the board, you know, from 2006 to 2019, and he was president in 2009, 2011, 2012, and 2017. So he's definitely qualified from that standpoint. And
Okay.
he was also Region 3 director. So he's got a lot of background behind him.
Right.
So,
Okay.
He's kind of a powerhouse.
Yeah, I stand corrected. All right. Are there any questions or comments from the public on this motion?
This is the moderator, and I will go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. All right, the question and answer panel is now available. If you would like to make a public comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" and send it to all panelists. If you're not seeing the Q&A panel, please click on the question mark within a square at the bottom middle of your screen, and we're displaying instructions for your reference as well. This is the moderator, and I'm seeing no request for public comment at this time. Would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please do.
Okay, thank you. I will.
All right, and so I will call for a vote on the motion, and the motion is to support Chuck Smith for president-elect and Julie Hildebrand and Bob Mercier for the Leadership Advisory Council member. And so on that, John Roshinsky, yes. Susan Landry,
Yes.
Patricia Trouth,
Yes.
Andrew Bowden.
Aye.
All right, the motion carries. Let's see here. We will move on to. I am going to ask that we move item I up in the agenda in order to accommodate the presentation there, and then move to item H after that.
This is the moderator, and we can go ahead. That would be Brandon, I believe, that's presenting this. So
I'm sorry, this is Trish. I'll give a little intro, and then
okay.
I just wanted to confirm with Brandon if you're ready for the presentation.
I am. Can you hear me and see me?
I can
Yes.
hear you are. Yes.
Great.
Okay, thank you. At the November 8th, 2019 LATC meeting, the members discussed QSD certification requirements and process for landscape architects as a result of receiving correspondence from a licensee. Staff shares, based on its preliminary research, the State Water Resources Control Board's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System general permit for stormwater discharges associated with construction land disturbance, which includes certification training for stormwater pollution prevention plans. The construction general permit requires that a QSD possesses one of 8 underlying professional licenses or certifications, which includes a landscape architect, and have attended a State Water Board sponsored or approved QSD training. At that meeting, the committee members expressed further interest and requested a presentation at a future meeting on the extent of the QSD certification training program. Requirements to become QSD certified, importance of being QSD certified, and how landscape architects can become QSD certified. At today's meeting, State Water Board staff and qualified industrial stormwater practitioner Brandon Rosenboom will provide a presentation on QSD certification, including the additional information requested by the committee. And I realized I started using QSD before explaining what that was. So that is an acronym for Qualified Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan Developer. Okay, Brandon.
All righty. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, members of the board and everyone joining us on the call. Thank you for inviting me here today to provide an overview on the Qualified SWIP Developer and Practitioner certifications. These are both certifications that are required by the Construction Stormwater General Permit. My name is Brandon Rosenboom, and I am currently serving as the lead staff of the State Water Resources Control Board's Construction Stormwater Permitting Program. Joining me today on the phone is Amy Cronson, and she is the unit chief of the Industrial and Construction Stormwater Permitting Program. In this presentation, we will be covering the background on the Construction Stormwater General Permit, the role of the Qualified SWIP Developer and Practitioner, the process of becoming a Qualified SWIP Developer and Practitioner, and landscape architects in relation to these certifications. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions. So, background. The construction stormwater general permit is part of the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, which was created through the adoption of the Federal Clean Water Act in the 1970s. Although a federal program, the US EPA has delegated its permitting authority to the State Water Resources Control Board. The current permit was adopted in 2009, amended in 2010 and 2012, and has been administratively extended since 2014. The construction stormwater general permit is required for construction projects that disturb 1 or more acres of land, or less than 1 acre, but are part of a larger common plan of development. The permit is primarily focused on pollution associated with erosion and sedimentation, as well as construction materials and equipment. One of the requirements of the construction general permit, and arguably the most important requirement, is the development of a stormwater pollution prevention plan, otherwise known as a SWIP. The SWIP documents how the discharger plans to comply with the requirements of the construction stormwater general permit and what best management practices or stormwater infrastructure they will be utilizing to achieve compliance. Considering how integral the SWIP is to compliance, the construction general permit requires that a qualified SWIP developer prepare the document on a site-specific basis. The qualified SWIP developer is expected to be knowledgeable in identifying pollutant sources and implementing best management practices to address those pollutants. This is by no means considered an entry-level role. The qualified SWIP developer will need to have experience identifying threats to stormwater quality associated with the unique topography, geology, materials, and activities involved in the project. Once those are identified, they must recommend solutions to address those pollutant sources, whether that be through practices, products, or structural controls. Another important part of the SWIP is the monitoring program, which is used to assess the discharger's compliance with the permit requirements. The qualified SWIP developer will have to develop the monitoring program, which includes routine best management practices inspections and sampling protocols at the identified discharge locations. On the other hand, qualified SWIP practitioners, QSPs, are the personnel responsible for implementing the SWIP elements developed by the qualified SWIP developer, including inspections and maintenance best management practices, or maintenance of best management practices, and the collection of stormwater and non-stormwater samples to be analyzed for contaminants. While the qualified SWIP developers prepare the SWIPs, qualified SWIP practitioners prepare rain event action plans, which are documents specific to each rain event and construction phase, which and these rain event action plans need to be prepared within 48 hours prior to any likely precipitation event. QSPs are generally more familiar with the day-to-day activities of a site and will be able to quickly transition those sites to protect water quality if precipitation is expected. The qualified SWIP practitioner's responsibility to ensure compliance out of site could be a large burden. Therefore, they are able to delegate these tasks to appropriately trained personnel who are knowledgeable in the principles of stormwater quality protection. Oftentimes, the qualified SWIP practitioner is the one who trains the personnel. So there are 4 steps to becoming a qualified SWIP developer or practitioner. Step 1, the applicant would register and take a qualified SWIP developer or practitioner training course offered by a trainer of record. A trainer of record is recognized by the California Stormwater Quality Association, otherwise known as CASQA, as an experienced stormwater professional capable of instructing new QSDs and QSPs. Training courses range from 16 to 24 hours of instruction, depending on whether the applicant is pursuing a qualified SWIP developer certification or practitioner certification, with the developers having an additional 8 hours of instruction. Step 2, the applicant will need to register for the qualified SWIP developer or practitioner exam through the Office of Water Programs at Sacramento State. CASQA partners with the Office of Water Programs to offer these qualified SWIP developer and practitioner examinations. Step 3, the applicant needs to take and pass the exam with a score of 70% or higher in order to earn their qualified SWIP developer or practitioner examination, or qualification, excuse me. And lastly, the applicant must provide information on a underlying certification or registration that they are using as a prerequisite. The applicant must have one of the underlying certifications or registrations to earn their qualifications, but steps 1 through 3 can be done prior to having that prerequisite. But it will not be issued until the prerequisite is met. So this slide presents a table of all the various prerequisite certifications or registrations that our applicants can provide to become a qualified SWIP developer or practitioner. And it's the reason why I'm here today. Third from the top, California registered landscape architects are considered qualified to become qualified SWIP developers and practitioners. So landscape architects are expected to be knowledgeable in the potential impacts that stormwater can have on a project, both during and post-construction. Understanding topography, geology, drainage, and how to design projects around those constraints are critical skills for qualified SWIP developers and practitioners. Last I checked, there are roughly 115 qualified SWIP developers that have used their landscape architect's license as a prerequisite, and 11 qualified SWIP practitioners that are doing so. And just for reference, every qualified SWIP developer is technically also a qualified SWIP practitioner. So in conclusion, I suppose my question to you is, do you believe that California registered landscape architects are adequately prepared through their prior education and experience for roles as qualified SWIP developers and practitioners? And with that, we will move on to the questions section.
Okay, thank you, Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Brandon, you said that they still would require to take the training, the 8 hour, what was it, 8 hours versus 16 hours?
So basically, landscape architects are considered, it's a prerequisite registration. So they are still required to take the qualified, either the qualified SWIP practitioner or SWIP developer training course by a trainer of record. And the practitioner course is 16 hours, and the developer course is an additional 8, so a total of 24 hours.
24 hours.
And these trainings are really to be familiar with the permit requirements. So while we consider landscape architects to have an expertise in stormwater and perhaps even erosion and sediment control, the training is really highlighting kind of what the permit actually requires for a particular construction project.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one question that I would have, Brandon, is let's say you're a licensed landscape architect and you become qualified as a developer or practitioner. Are you precluded from essentially providing services on your own projects? Is there any limitation on that?
I do not believe so. I believe that a landscape architect who has a project is able to be their own qualified SWIP developer and practitioner.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. This is Amy Cronson.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next,
Yes?
oh, it's okay?
Yes.
Oh, thank you, John. Yeah, Brandon, first of all, thank you for the presentation. And I'm a president for the State Architects Board, and my day job is the chief architect for BOT. And we were selected by your team as one of the first pilot project to implementing LID. So we finished the job. I feel it's so important that for the subject come to the architects board. And now I have a detailed question about with that certificate, is come with some kind of procedural requirements. Some of the project, for example, funded by water board has to be certified by this profession or this certified entity, or any other consideration that you are thinking well in place.
Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
So with that new certification system, are you thinking that any project that will be funded by the water board will require certification from this certified professional?
I believe.
Or you are not planning on to do this yet? What is the implication of that certification to the practice of stone drilling?
Basically, or Amy, are you jumping in?
Sure, yeah.
Oh,
This is Amy Johnson. Mr. Feng, this is the existing certification practice for the construction general permit. And so these are those qualified SWIP developers and qualified SWIP practitioners that need to be involved in every construction project over an acre in the state. And so it's an existing program that's been going on since 2009. In terms of funding from the Water Board, I'm not sure if you're speaking about the funding that we give to projects through the Division of Financial Assistance, which gives grants and funding to stormwater projects, or if you were talking about a Water Board's project, maybe you could clarify that.
Yeah, I would refer to any project receive funding from Water Board to go through certain process that will meet the satisfaction of the grant or the financial help. In terms of the Water Board want to enforce. For example, do you want certain inspection report to be produced? For our project, for example, we use our civil engineer and do the documentation you ask us to do, not involve a specific certification of profession you just indicated now.
I see. Yeah. So this is just a required certification to actually do the construction and to manage the stormwater on site. And so it doesn't have any implications for funding or reporting or anything like that.
So who is enforcing it? Is jurisdictions, building department enforce, make sure the contract has such personnel on board?
The regional boards are the regional water quality control boards are our enforcement branch, and basically when they go to a construction site for an inspection, they will be reviewing the SWIP, and if the SWIP was not prepared by a qualified SWIP developer, or it's not being implemented by someone who's trained by the QS or the qualified SWIP practitioner or the SWIP practitioner, then they can essentially notice a violation of the permit, because the permit requires that the construction project have a qualified SWIP developer and practitioner.
And that permit is issued by the municipality or county or water board at state level, or
the permit is issued by the state water board, and then we have our regional water boards that enforce upon the permit, but we're all part of one big umbrella.
Right. Thank you, Brandon. This is very helpful, Amy, as well. Thank you again for bringing the material to us.
Yeah, I have one more quick question. In your slide, it said that this typically applies to projects of 1 acre or more, but it says it can be less than 1 acre if it's part of a larger common plan of development. Can you give an example of what that would be?
An example of a larger common plan of development?
An example of a less than 1 acre site, what exactly, what exactly would that be?
Okay. Oftentimes we see this part of this requirement of the permit go into effect for things like subdivisions. So a lot of times the subdivisions might be broken out into different property owners and developers. And so in order to avoid artificially getting away from the permit requirements, or saying that any of the subdivision, like the subdivision's the greater development, and that all needs all needs the construction general permit. And so any smaller division of that larger development also needs to be covered by the construction general permit. So I don't know if that answers it, but an example would be like, say, a half-acre lot that's built for a custom home, but it's part of a larger development. That would need to also be covered under the permit.
Okay.
Yeah. Or another example that I think I've come across is like the development of a strip mall in a sense. So one person was developing the strip mall, which was over a few acres, and then a smaller part of that development was a gas station, which was less than an acre. But that gas station also needs to have coverage under the construction general permit because it was part of that larger plan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you said that it's not necessarily a 1 acre project, but it's 1 acre of disturbance, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That's an important clarification. So when we're regulating these sites, it's primarily it's all based on the size of the disturbance. So say the site is 100 acres, but they're only disturbing, 70 or like 0.75 acres, 3/4 of an acre, then they would not need coverage necessarily.
Okay, and then just one other clarification. When you say disturbance, is that anywhere where they've moved soil around, where they're grading?
Correct. It's all grading. Any activity that's kind of changing the soil, that's all considered disturbance. So clearing, grading, excavation, all that.
Clearing would be considered disturbance?
Correct. Like clearing and grubbing of vegetation is often considered land disturbing activity.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Any questions or comments from the public?
This is the moderator. I will go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. All right, the question and answer panel is now available. If you would like to make a public comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," and submit it to all panelists. And if you're not seeing the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, please click on the question mark within a square at the bottom middle of your screen. Thank you. This is the moderator, and I am seeing no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll do that.
Great. Currently being shown on the slides is my contact information. Right now I'm working from home, so my work number is not quite applicable. But you can always shoot me an email or shoot the Stormwater help desk email as well, because they can direct the question to whoever's working that day. And occasionally I'm out, like typically Fridays I'm out, but that's just for your edification.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much, Brandon.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. Let's move back to item H, review and discussion of 2020 legislation. And Laura, if you could present this item.
Sure. So let's see, we'll start with AB 2028 by Assembly Member Aguirre Curry. I think the text is in your packet. The legislature finished their session at the beginning of this week, and this bill, and it's the end of a 2-year session. So this bill didn't make it out of the legislature by the end of session, so it's dead and would have to be reintroduced as a new bill in the next session. It was relating to additional requirements for meetings by state boards like LATC and the Architects Board, requiring the meeting materials to be posted at the time, at least 10 days in advance. So we'll see if this comes back next year. Any questions on this item from members? The next one is AB 2113 by Assembly Member Lowe. It's going to apply to all boards within the Department of Consumer Affairs and requires us to expedite licensure for applications from refugees, asylees, or special immigrant visa holders. I don't think we have a lot of people in this category now. It does give the ability to adopt regulations to implement this. So I think we'll look to really check with the department as to exactly how they'd like us to implement this, if we need to modify our applications to request this information, but it shouldn't have a significant impact on operations. Are there any questions on this item? The next one is AB 2257 by Assemblymember Gonzalez. This is a follow-up to legislation last year related to what's called the Dynamex decision about the classification of workers as to whether or not they're independent contractors. This bill contained additional exemptions, but it primarily applies to like performing, like music performances and careers in that area. It doesn't appear to apply to landscape architecture. So I think as the bill was going through the session, there was talk about what would be included, but it was fairly limited at the end. Any questions on this item? Okay. The fourth one is Senate Bill 878 by Senator Jones. This requires all of the boards within the department to post online their average processing times for applications. So I don't believe we do this now, but it won't be difficult to do that. And if there are no questions, the last item is Senate Bill 1474. It's a committee bill by the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee. This bill did, for most of the year, contain language that would have allowed LATC to implement the fingerprint requirement that was imposed last year by Senate Bill 608. That language was removed towards the end of the legislative session. The Department of Justice had some concerns that they need to make changes to how the fingerprint program operates. And so they didn't want to codify further language. So instead, SB 1474 delays for 1 year the fingerprint requirement for LATC so that we could work out the issues with the implementation. So then the fingerprinting will start January 1, 2022. And then next year we'll seek the legislation again to allow for the implementation. So we'll work with Department of Justice in the fall to see what issue they had. But so the board's going to start fingerprinting January 1, 2021, and LATC will be 1 year later. And again, that's for new applicants only.
Oh. Question, so people like us that are already licensed will not need to be fingerprinted?
Right, that's correct. It's for new applicants only at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, I just have a quick question, Laura, and this is it was going back to AB 2257.
Yeah.
On page 94 of our book, of our handout, it says, it's number 3, an individual who holds an active license from the state of California is practicing on one of the following recognized professions: lawyer, architect, landscape architect, engineer, private investigator, or accountant. And the word landscape architect is italicized. Does that mean that, does the italicized mean that we were added to that particular provision?
Okay, bear with me 1 second because I have a hard copy and I'm not.
And Andy, I can address that. Yes, landscape architects were added to the exempt list. And my understanding is that bill was approved and is now on the governor's desk for his signature. And he's got until, I believe, the end of this month to either veto that or sign it. And if it is signed, landscape architects will be exempt under the current provisions.
So
Well,
John's correct about the time. The bill's been amended a couple times since this version that's in your packet. So when I look at the final analysis, it doesn't reflect anything about landscape architecture, but I have to review it a little bit further, and then I'll send out a clarification email after the meeting, or I can maybe come back to this item.
Okay, yeah, if you could, only because, I mean, if we are, now included, I mean, that could be kind of a big thing.
Yeah.
In a way, and we should be notifying people of that fact, that it's either that it got added, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing yet. So, but yeah, it appears to me like it would be a good thing for us to be exempt. So again, there becomes a time when we should be like tooting our own horn a little bit and letting the public know that we've been added, assuming, of course, that we actually have. What I'm seeing in the packet would indicate that we have been added. But so if you could, Laura, if you could verify that, that would be great.
Yeah, John, is it all right if we come back to this item at the end?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other questions or comments for Laura on this? I'm not sure if we have to go out to public questions or comments on this particular item, but I will ask if there are any questions or comments from the public.
This is the moderator. I will go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. All right, if any members of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" and submit it to all panelists using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and we are displaying instructions for your reference. This is the moderator. I'm seeing no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, we will move now to item J. Update on intra-departmental contracts with the Office of Professional Examination Services for Landscape Architects, California Supple Examination, Written Examination Development and Review of LARE and Linkage Study. And if Trish will present that agenda item, please.
Thank you. So included in the packet are both the interagency contracts for the exam development and a separate one for the linkage study. Since these contracts have already been executed, they're provided as an update for the purpose of this meeting. We have commenced exam development workshops for the CSE. The workshop in August was held remotely. However, there will be a few more September through December, and those will be held in person using social distancing guidelines. And so earlier in my presentation with the CLARB agenda, I noted that they are going to be presenting an update on their linkage study. For our interdepartmental contract, we have outlined dates in there in which we will begin our linkage study to compare their national study. However, since they are in the process of updating theirs, we are holding off from the dates that are outlined within this contract and beginning sometime at the beginning of next year. However, I have confirmed with Office of Professional Exam Services that they will still be able to complete the linkage study by the end of the term of the contract, which is June 30th of next year. So that's my update. Any questions?
Thank you. Okay, hearing none from the committee, I will ask for any public comment or questions.
This is the moderator. I will go ahead and open the Q&A panel. All right, the question and answer panel is now available. If you would like to make a public comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. This is the moderator. I see no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you. I will.
Okay, and we will now move on to item K. Discuss and possible action on 2019-21 strategic plan objectives to educate the different jurisdictional agencies, both state and local, about landscape architecture licensure and its regulatory scope of practice to allow licensees to perform duties prescribed within the regulation. And I will ask Trish to present this item.
Okay, thank you. This is a carryover item from our February meeting in which the committee was presented with proposed changes to the landscape architect section of the board's building official information guide. All of this in an effort to try and address the issues that some landscape architects were having in acceptance of their stamps at local jurisdictions. So during that meeting, Patricia Trouth was appointed to work with staff to enhance the information that was discussed and proposed during that meeting, and also come up with a distribution methodology for all of the information, which we've done. So during that discussion, members did ask if the board received any input from building officials at the time that they had prepared the guide, and so we had asked if Laura could present to the committee any feedback on that, and then so she'll follow me here shortly, but I just wanted to say that what the committee is being asked for here is to review and approve the proposed language that's contained within the draft building officials guide and the distribution methodology.
Is Laura available to?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Trish, are you done with your?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I checked to see the comments the board's received on our on the guide since we released it earlier in the year, and we just received kind of a few general comments that they were happy with it. We didn't have any specific comments or questions or concerns with it from building officials. They were just happy to have a new version available.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Questions or comments? Here, John, questions or comments?
Either.
I just want to thank you guys. I was one of the ones that brought this up. I've been handing out our little booklets at our local public agencies, so I read through what was added, and it makes it very good. I think it accomplished what my goal was before, so thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question and a comment, I guess. The question is, I worked with Stacy on how this guidebook would be distributed, and she had a very comprehensive list, which I think is great. I also see this as a tool that landscape architects can use if they run into any problems. So I just want to confirm that this document will be available on the website, and if you can kind of say where it would be available.
We have a publications link that we can provide that information. We'll also send it electronically to the various jurisdictions. We also plan to focus mailing hard copies to areas that we know some landscape architects have been having those issues.
Thank you.
This is Andy. May I make a comment?
Yes, Andy.
Ask a question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at under the landscape architecture section of the book, item number 6, may an unlicensed person advertise landscape architectural services? I know we've kind of discussed this in the past, but it got brought to my attention again just recently, only as a matter of like 2-3 weeks ago. I got a comment from a licensee, again, complaining about, what is it? Houzz, Houzz, and another, one of the other websites that allow people to advertise their services. And where in the pull down menu, there's not an item for landscape designer. So their only choice, if they're an unlicensed individual and they're doing landscape design legitimately, legally, but there isn't a category for them to put landscape design. So they're only the only choice they have is landscape architect. So a question that was asked of me is this still being addressed by the LATC, or can it be addressed by the LATC? I know it was addressed at one time, maybe a year or so ago, but has there been any additional follow-up on that?
This is Trish. I can try and answer that. Yes, you are correct. Over a year ago, we did send out letters to the various platforms explaining, what the issue is. However, we really don't have authority over those changes that we were asking for. I don't believe any were made. Stacy, I don't know if you have any update on that, but we have not been tasked to do anything further with it. We did make more than one attempt to communicate with the various platforms and request that they add a different category for the unlicensed individuals.
This is Stacy. I have nothing to add. I was just going to say, yeah, we did make more than one attempt, and we did send a couple of letters to them. But again, like Trish said, we don't really have the authority to require them to make those changes. So we don't really know how much more LATC can do.
Mm-hmm. Did you get any response back from them from that reach out?
Again, this is Stacy. No, we didn't get any responses from any of them.
Okay.
So my question would be to Tara. Tara, is there anything that the LATC can do, or is there anything that the state of California can do? Because basically what happens is that these people are advertising themselves as landscape architects when they're not landscape architects.
I was going to ask the same question. To me, it goes to false advertising.
Right, exactly.
They're not giving the ability for the person to uncheck the box. And so to me, it seems like it's false advertising for them to acknowledge. Because I had a problem once a year and a half ago. There wasn't a category, and they had by themselves put me in the architecture category. So I think it's false advertising.
So again, my question to Tara, if Tara is still on the call, is there anything that we can do, or anything that the state of California can do?
Well, would it also be an issue of aiding and abetting? I mean, if they're giving these people no choice in how to do it, knowing what the law is, and they're allowing people to, or forcing people into that, are they aiding and abetting an illegal action?
Yeah, don't know. We would need Tara to respond to that. I'm assuming Tara must not be on the call.
This is the
This is Tara.
Oh, hi, Tara.
Okay, so as far as aiding and abetting goes, you would have to prove that there was some intent on the part of the website to allow the individual to participate in unlicensed practice. I know that we have attempted to send some cease and desist letters in the past to some of these sites, but there's very little we can do against a private entity that is just randomly picking up information and presumably using some kind of computer system to assign certain characteristics to individuals' names. If we can prove that the individual themselves characterize themselves as a landscape architect, such that, like, say in LinkedIn, you would be describing what services you provide. That's not what LinkedIn is telling people. It's what how you are describing your services. We would be able to go after the individual for unlicensed practice, such that they are advertising a service they are not licensed to provide. But it's we can't at this point go after third-party private companies who just have someone's name listed and they're potentially using a program that automatically assigns a characteristic to the individual. So on another point, I wanted to point out that on number 5, we're talking about item 6, unlicensed person advertisements. I wanted to just mention on number 5, with respect to local building officials rejecting landscape architect stamps, this description would coincide with legislative amendments that the board approved in February to change Business and Professions Code section 5659 to specifically prohibit local building officials from rejecting landscape architect stamp plans. That is not in effect. So I'm a little concerned about including this description right now when we know that we are attempting to better clarify that statute. So I just wanted to point that out. You know, obviously this is still in draft form. This is not published at this point. But I do want to, you know, continue to press for amendments to Business and Professions Code 5659, hopefully in the next legislative session, to provide the prohibition that landscape architects need so that they can, you know, file their documents with county recorders and get their permits issued.
Well, I guess the question that I have is, does the law state now that anything within our Practice Act, we are authorized to submit stamp drawings, yes or no?
There's a requirement for you to stamp your plans, and you know, and that provides the limitation that unlicensed individuals can't stamp the plans. But there's no directive to local building officials or, you know, county recorders to say you can't require another licensee to then stamp. We're trying to, you know, provide that clarity in the Practice Act.
Okay. Well, I guess one option would be, in this particular case for item 5, would be to strike that reference for right now. And then in the future, if and when it is becomes part of the regulation, we just add that back in at that point.
I need a clarification. So if we pull this out, you know, what kind of time frame are we talking about being able to put it back in? Because it's been a learning experience for me to see how long it takes to get anything changed.
Well, assuming that you can get it folded into some business and professions bill, it's going to take a minimum of a year. It wouldn't be effective until January 1, 2022, if it gets passed and signed next year.
Well, I'm assuming that it's already started through that process. Is that correct? But it did not make it out of the legislature. Is that why it's kind of a dead issue right now for this year?
This is Laura. We did submit it, but it was past the deadline for when Senate BNP had requested amendments. So typically they'll accept them late, but because of the condensed time frame of the legislative session this year, I think that's the reason it didn't get included. So we can certainly try again next year. I don't believe we had any concerns raised about it. So it seems like a good chance it could get included, but yeah, we'll try again.
And was the intention to include it in the DCA package of legislative changes?
It was to include it in the bill we talked about earlier, SB 1474, the omnibus bill by Senate Business and Professions Committee. They'll typically author a bill that will take changes for the boards.
Okay. So in other words, we have to wait until January to even begin again.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have another clarification? So we're calling this Building Official Information Guide. Does that make a difference? Versus a law?
I think it doesn't make a difference just because you're calling this a guide, because you're representing that the law prohibits local building officials from rejecting plans stamped by landscape architects. And, you know, until we can really get that clarified in your law, I don't feel very confident that you can make that claim.
Tara, sorry, this is Trish. For the purpose of this guide, would we be able to still perhaps keep that number 5 item in there with just perhaps providing some background and our intent to make the changes to 56, 59?
I mean, I don't know how you would describe your intent, because if your intent is to prohibit them, I don't think that gets you very far. I think the best you could do would be just to state the law, which is the first and second sentences, or rather probably even strike no. It should just read, landscape architects are authorized to prepare and stamp these plans as part of their services, and that's it. They are, in fact, authorized under the Practice Act to sign these. You're just highlighting the point that they can. So you're implying that local building officials should be accepting these documents. I would not recommend going any further than that.
Okay.
All right. Well, that seems pretty clear. I guess I would call for a motion, at least at this point in time, to basically strike everything in Section 5 with the exception of the first two or the first sentence. And then we can revisit this at a future date if and when we can get that legislative change.
This is Tara. I've got a point of clarification on this. So I think your motion is to include question number 5, and in the answer, strike no on the first line, and then include the next full sentence that begins with landscape architects are authorized and ends with of their services, then strike the rest of the paragraph beginning with local building officials.
All right. So I will call, unless there's further discussion, I will call for a motion.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a second. Is there any further comments or discussion from the committee members? Okay, hearing none, I will ask for any questions or comments from the public.
This is the moderator. I will go ahead and open up the question and answer panel. All right, the question and answer panel is now available. If you would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. This is the moderator, and I'm seeing no request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
And I will now call for a vote to approve the motion, which is to include or to accept the changes in the landscape architecture section, including question 5, which is to strike the word no and include only the first sentence after that and strike the remainder of the paragraph. All right, I will take the vote. John Roshinsky, yes. Susan Landry,
Yes.
Patricia Trouth,
Yes.
and Andrew Bowden.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. Let's see, we will now move on to item L, discuss and possible action on new LATC logo. And Trish, if you could present that item.
So this item is also a carryover from our February meeting. The committee reviewed 12 draft logos designed by the DJ Office of Publications, Design and Editing. The logos were presented in black and white to not distract from the design. Members expressed interest in a simplified logo that clearly represented California landscape architecture rather than architecture. Members also agreed that the current logo should be updated. After discussion, the committee agreed to develop feedback outlining their overall design expectations, which covers the breadth of landscape architecture, and to discuss the input at today's meeting to be able to provide direction to the Office of Publications, Design and Editing. Additionally, it was recommended that the members provide PDE an input on 2 or 3 of the preferred designs.
Okay. I will open up to the committee. Any comments, discussion on this item?
Yes. Sorry. I'm trying to raise my hand.
Okay.
So I was not able to attend the previous meeting, but I did provide public comments. I still don't think they're close. The only one I think is close enough is the one that has the 3 trees on top of the 3 swirly lines, curvy lines, but the trees don't look very good. I don't know what everybody else thinks, but to me, that's the closest of anything within the set.
What number is that?
Huh?
Which number? There's attachments. There's numbers at the top.
L.2.3.
I'm in agreement. I had picked that one as well. again, I agree with Susan. I don't care for the trees, the way that they're depicted, but I like the font and the way that landscape architects with the line with technical committee underneath it, spaced out, looks good. I like the three curvy lines. I think that's, plays well. I think if we were to make a comment back to the graphic designer, I would say see if we can get trees that are a little bit more realistic looking. The only other one that I and I'm not really all that fond of any of them, but the only other one that I thought was had some merit was attachment L.2.11. Looks like landscape.
I'm sorry, Ken. Everybody mute other than Andy at this time. Thanks.
So L.2.11 looks like it's got some actual landscape design to it. My only comment is the building looks like a parking garage, so I didn't much care for that. And I don't care for the font as much as I did in L.2.3. So if we took the font from L.2.3 and put it on L.2.11, that would help that look a little bit better. And if the building itself could be modified so it doesn't look like a parking garage and had a little bit more architectural flavor to it, then that might make a difference on that one. So in my mind, it's the difference. It's either L.2.3 or L.2.11 with those modifications. Those are my comments.
I would also add that when you see it in the small scale on the closer to the bottom of the page, the three lines are thicker than the gap in between, and they tend to blur together in the smaller scale. That
which one are you talking about?
I'm L.2.3. That when you see it small, the black lines almost not quite, but they look like they're all together. That maybe the actual curved lines could be a little thinner. Keep it that they're not uniform from end to end, but not so thick. And then that way the gap in between would read a little better. But definitely new trees.
This is Patricia. So, in the meeting minutes, we said several times to keep it simple. And I don't think any of these are simple. I think they're way too complicated. That being said, I don't think that, we're tasked with, trying to push a particular design. So I'll support whichever one gets the most support. But I just think they're too complicated. And the L.2.3, yeah, I don't like the trees. But when we start talking about how we want an oak tree, I think we're just going down the wrong path. I really think it needs to be simple. It needs to be clean. It needs to represent the profession. And, when I look at L.2.3, that could be some biology, certification, so logo. So, I don't think any of them are simple. They're all way too busy. And just to throw in my 2 cents, I thought that L.2 and L.2.8, I thought were the ones that I thought looked the best. But all of them they're way too busy in my opinion.
You with that? Not remembering all the history of this, but did we go out to an open call to people for suggestions, like to other licensed people?
I don't think we did that, but we did talk about having students do something, and then there was some reason why that wasn't going to work. But yeah, I think we need to just really, it needs to be real minimalistic. You know, and I'm looking at what the architects have, and I guess that's a new one. And you know, there's no building on there. You know, it kind of implies something, you know, coming up kind of from the ground, and but it doesn't look like a building. I don't think we need to be real literal with this logo.
This is Tara. I wanted to clarify for everyone why we didn't put this out, this idea out for students, and that's mainly because we've got trademark concerns. You know, you've got a student who creates this really cool trademark that they will never get money for because we will have to have them sign a contract that they turn over all right, title, and interest to the committee. That's why.
Thank you.
So this is Tian. Just to call the conversation, I was one of the troublemakers comment on the first exercise. So coming back on the actual design, I remember one discussion was talking about the literal versus a more abstract. And another discussion is also talk about what are the elements of the built environment or natural environment that landscape architect interface with. So if I recall correctly, then L.2 might be also, as Patricia mentioned, one of the scheme responsive to some of the comment. So it looks like it implies has the soils, has the ground, earth, and has the water, and have plants. So that's seems in terms of design itself, if we're all designers, we probably want something less we call the rigid, repetitive. For example, you don't need to have 3 lines for the earth and 3 lines for the water. You could say to vary the number of lines a little bit. Anyway, so I recall some of the conversation. This is always an interesting topic, so I cannot stop myself. I mean, make some comments again.
Well, it sounds like there's not.
I have a suggestion.
Sure.
Okay, so right now, you know, maybe some of the issue is that we have too many choices, and so maybe we could narrow it down to like 3, and then ask them to do different things to those 3.
I agree. That's what I was going to suggest. And I would recommend 2.2, 2.3, and 2.11.
Include 2.11, and I'm afraid if we get too many variations, we get 3 variations on 3 designs, we're getting 9 choices again. Can we leave it at 2.2 and 2.23 and then ask for the variations just on the 2 of them?
So are you saying 2.2 because, okay, I don't remember anybody commenting on that one.
Yeah, Andy, are you, John, are you referred to L.2 or 2.2?
I'm sorry, 2L2.
Okay.
L2. Yeah, I'm sorry, not the other one. That's 2.
Yeah, L2.2. I think
L2, just L2.
L2 and L2.3, narrow it down to those 2 with the suggestions of simplifying, looking at the spacing and the thickness of the lines and the trees.
I support that. suggestion.
Yeah, I support that as well.
So should I make a motion, John?
Yes, please.
So I make a motion that the staff comes back with modifications to design L.2 and L2.3 and provide variations which address the thickness and spacing of the lines and the tree design.
And if it can be simplified.
Oh yeah, start with that word, simplify. I accept that as a friendly amendment.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, Susan, if you can, well, I guess we have a motion, and are there any further comments or questions from the
This is
committee
Laura.
members?
This is Laura. I'm not sure that you actually need to vote on this. You're just asking for further work on this by staff and to bring it back to the committee. So I think you could just provide staff the direction and bring it back on the next agenda without a vote.
Okay.
That's enough direction then, Laura?
I think so. Trish, are you comfortable with that?
Yes, that's
Sounds good to me.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see. So we will move on then to item M, review of future LATC meeting dates. And Trish, if you would present that item.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, next week on Thursday, we have the CLARB meeting, which Andy has indicated he is registered and will be attending. And then on the 18th, the board will be having their meeting. So John, as chair, I don't know if you plan to attend or we want to
Yes.
open it up. Okay.
Yes, I'm volunteering to attend that meeting.
Great, thank you. And then our next meeting will be held virtually again December 2nd. And so following this meeting, I will be sending the link to that. And then the board meeting will be on December 11th. On December 2nd, we can identify who might be able to attend the board meeting at that time. Any questions?
Okay, yeah. Are there any questions or any items that any of the committee members would like to see addressed in the next board meeting on tentatively scheduled for December 2nd?
If I could, this is Trish. Just if we do have a couple of items already prepared for that, so I can maybe let you know what we're planning to do. So as you know, we'll be holding, as we normally would, the elections for both chair and vice chair. I also mentioned earlier that we will have the UC Extension review for approval by the committee. And a presentation by OPEZ is anticipated for that meeting as well. So that's what I have so far. If there's anything else.
May I ask a question? May I ask a question?
Yes.
When is the next strategic planning meeting?
So the current strategic plan is through 2021. It'll be sometime November, December of 2021.
2021.
Yes, the current plan.
Sorry, I blanked out. I'm 1 year behind. Sorry.
I know, Andy.
Yeah,
it's hard. It's hard not to be these days.
Yeah, exactly. 2021. Jeez.
What happened in 2020?
Yeah, really. I have one little comment. So I just noticed when I was reading through things that the CAB, the California Architects Board, just issued a newsletter. So, you know, I was just wondering if we could have a little bit of a conversation about that. I don't know if we, if LATC is integrated into that newsletter at all, but, you know, it would be nice to just have a discussion about that.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, we have provided articles in the past. It's not on a regular basis, but we can definitely include that in the strategic planning discussion.
Mm-hmm.
This is Laura, and we'd be happy to include in the newsletter article, or each edition of the newsletter, an article for LATC if that's what the committee would like. So, you know, at times we kind of struggle with our content as well. So we'd be happy to have another topic to add to each issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other items? I would just like to go back to, let's see if I can find it here. The question that Laura was going to look into in regards to the AB 2257.
I did look, and thank you for that. And I apologize for my mistake. It is in there. The bill's been rewritten since the copy that's in your packet. So it's in, I can send you the link to the newest language, but it's in section 2783 of the labor code proposed.
Okay.
Are included.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Laura.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, or anything from the committee?
I'll just make a comment. Wish me luck. I'm up for re-election. You'll know on December if I win or not. So it's going to be interesting.
And that's for city council or for, okay.
And I'm mayor right now. What a year to be the mayor. We held emergency meetings. We had a $7 million budget deficit. We closed our downtown street. No. So anyways, hopefully I'll win.
Good luck. You have our support.
Yes,
Thank
good
you.
luck.
Come to Campbell and register to vote then.
Okay.
So I was told by high up people you can vote a couple of times. Maybe I do that for you.
Yeah, really. Thanks, you guys.
Purple, I don't think you can do campaigning on the. I don't think you can do campaigning on the LATC.
I'm not campaigning. Thank you guys. Thanks to staff for a lot of work to get us through today.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I guess with that, I will call the meeting to adjournment, and I have 2:26. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good,
Yes,
good
thank
meeting.
you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.